Today on Homeworthy, we're stepping into the world of antique dealers' homes, where history and artistry come together in the most captivating ways. First, we'll visit a Connecticut home where a majestic whale skeleton hovers above the dining table, and striking art finds its place in the den. Next, we'll explore a New England home filled with impressive works of art that tell a story of their own. Finally, we'll take a tour of a Palm Beach sanctuary brimming with vintage coastal treasures and vibrant colors. Watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hi, Homeworthy. Welcome to my farm in Sharon, Connecticut. My name is Michael Trout. Please come in.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story. To shop items inspired by this and other Homeworthy episodes, be sure to check out the product links below for amazing furniture, accessories, and more.
When I bought the house had been abandoned for 9 years. And the whole farm had been abandoned, and before then there had been renters in it for quite a bit of time. And so the windows were broken, there was a fire in the kitchen, the ceiling, there was a kitchen there, and the ceiling was all burnt out. People had stolen the copper pipes out of the walls and the wires out of the walls to scrap it, to buy drugs or whatever, I can't imagine. They stole the front door, which is really embarrassing, but it's like, that's just, but nobody thought anyone would buy this and actually fix it up, because initially it had been a roadhouse from the 1790s, and it was tiny little rooms all over the place, and there were rooms all above here. So when I bought it, I thought I only wanted the barns. I wanted the barns for my warehouse. And I thought, this is great. So I fixed up the barn, I put a roof on it, I poured floors, I made it really nice. It was really great. And I moved all of my stuff in it. And then I put a little lock on the outside of the door. And I turned around, and behind me is this big white abandoned house that the weeds are about 10 feet tall in front of it. And I thought, it's not a great look, nor is that actually looking very secure, since I just put all of my goods inside the barn. So I thought, okay, what I'll do is I'll rent it. And so I started ripping out the walls up in here in these bedrooms. And there was a tiny staircase that you would fall to your death if you tried to go down it too fast, that was over here. And, it was a nightmare. And I was pulling walls apart, and I thought, this is stupid. I had 4 houses in 6 miles, and I thought, it's just too much. Everywhere I went, something was falling apart, or something needed to be cut, or something needed to be weeded. So I thought, okay, well, I will redo this. I'm going to make this my house. I'm going to move here. I'm going to sell the other houses. I'll be next to my stuff, so that's actually really easy. And I don't need all those tiny, horrible, little depressing rooms. I'm just going to rip them out and open it up. So it's 2 stories, double height in the main part of this living space. I guess this is what I call a keeping room, which is, it's keeping the living room, dining room, and a sitting room kind of all together. I've got a fireplace here. I built it, but I installed an 18th century French mantle. It's from the south of France, and it's limestone. It's Louis XVI, and it's kind of things in the south of France were a little more provincial than they were sort of around Paris. So it's a little more relaxed, a little simpler, a little nicer, a little friendlier. There's a skeleton of a cat that came out of a Chicago laboratory from the 1920s, and a collection of Greek bottles here, and a great big sea fan, which I love. It's kind of the color of bone. The walls are covered in, it's mainly Ming Swatao, blue and white plates. And they all came out of a shipwreck that was found off the coast of Sumatra. And they were made around 1540, 1560 for the spice trade. And Ming Swatao is just a low-grade blue and white porcelain that the Chinese thought was completely inferior, and that's why they thought they would send it to the Western plantation owners and trade for spices. And it was kind of like their ironstone of the period. The small plates are Kangxi, which is it's early 18th century. The big medallions are done by a Scandinavian sculptor named Thorensen, and it's morning and evening, or what the figures represent. There's 2 chandeliers, and they're Spanish, mid-19th century. They're just kind of cool. And when they're lit, they're just, the light is really beautiful. They'll light the entire room in here. For the summer, I cover all my furniture in like white linen and white, and I put down these Tuareg mats because it sort of makes it kind of cooler and nicer and a little more friendlier. And in the winter, it's all this kind of deep, brilliant red. So it's quite intense and quite cozy. Probably the oldest things in this room are these 3 bottles. They're Roman, 1st, 2nd century BC. I think they're called alborea, which is the shape. And they have, this guy's offering this guy whatever's in this vase. And here's a couple of an archer, and this is a soldier, with this staff. Everything's kind of old. Old doesn't make something valuable, it just makes it sort of, it is old, I'm not so concerned about age as I am about beauty. And if something's beautiful, it's beautiful. It doesn't mean it's valuable. It doesn't mean it's not valuable. It doesn't mean that it has provenance or age or anything like that. It just simply is beautiful. And that's sort of what I always traffic in, is beautiful objects. And I think, I think dead weeds on the table are really beautiful for, their simplicity and their, Mother Nature, I think, is incredibly beautiful. That's why I like the skeletons, because I think it's the structural part of what makes us is fascinating. And I just think that beauty can be found, it's everywhere if you just look. And here's the dining room table. The base of the table is 16th century. It came out of a monastery. And the top is an 18th century floor out of the central France. Actually, it came out of Montpellier. And I have a little tableau vivant here going on. This pottery here is called Hispano-Moresque. And these are 16th century, and the capitals are probably, 15th and 18th century, and the big pot's Italian, and that's 19th century. These are shipwreck pieces that I actually just bought. And it's called Swan Kalat, but it's kind of the same period as Song Dynasty. So you're talking about 1400, 1300, 1400, and the corals just grew naturally. They're just really, really pretty, and beautiful shapes, simple shapes. And it's kind of nice to be able to find something so old that's been underwater for, hundreds and hundreds of years and still has, it's still intact. The red beads are Tibetan, and they're called malas. And they're, in the Tibetan culture, they're handed down from mother to daughter. And so each strand of beads is made out of multiple beads from different generations, and depending upon how many daughters you had and things like that. But it's this like great coral color, and there's always speculation on whether the Tibetans just like that color or whether they actually traded in coral, because you do find coral in Tibetan jewelry. And what they think it is that when the Himalayas were, part of the seabed, there was a vein of coral that was found in there, and that when the mountains were rising, they found the vein of coral and they mined it. And after that ran out, they started making it, because these beads are made out of a combination between like ceramic and glass. And the runner is Kuba cloth from the Congo, and it's raffia that's appliqué in these kind of like great patterns, and they're really, really complicated to do, especially if you're dealing with woven grass. And here's the living room. Again, I've just covered everything in white linen for the summer season. The skeletons are bottlenose porpoises, these smaller ones that are behind. And the big one is a pilot whale. And that came out of a little museum in the Spice Islands in Indonesia. And they kind of just float beautifully in this space above the dining room table. And when I was installing this, I did it with my two assistants, Alyssa and Rachel. And I was just hell-bent on getting the whale skeleton up. But I kept running back and forth to the hardware store. And the woman in the hardware store is like, why don't you just tell me what you're trying to do? And I said, you probably won't believe me. And she's like, just try me. And I said, well, I'm hanging a whale skeleton above my dining room table. She had never heard that one before. And I'm sure she's still talking about it. But it comes all in pieces and it's all numbered. So it's like putting a puzzle together. You put, number 29 next to 30, next to 31, and all the way down. And then it comes out that it's a whale. But it's fun. Because it's a long shoebox. And I had this kind of space. And I also had just bought 2 whale skeletons. And I thought, well, I'll sell the one whale skeleton, and I know exactly where I can fit the other one in. So I covered the ceiling in plywood, because I know it's going to be hanging a whale skeleton from it, so that it would stay up and not fall down on the dining guests below it. The floors in this room it's Belgian bluestone. It's 17th century, and it was used as ballast during the spice trade in Indonesia. And what they would do is they would take the floors and they would fill the bottom of those like big clipper ships, and that would weight the ships down to hold the mass up. And then they would go from Holland to the Indonesia, to Batavia and Java. And when they got there, they would unload the stone and fill the ballast. They would fill the hulls with spices, and that would be the weight to get them back to Europe. And so when the stone arrived in Indonesia, it was a Dutch colony, and they installed it in, Dutch colonial buildings, a lot of which now kind of wound up on like military bases and things like that. There's not a lot of appreciation for colonial architecture. I've been buying it in Indonesia and shipping it back, but originally it comes from Holland, and the wood that is separating it is a wood called ulin, And Ulin only comes from the island of Borneo. And it's a very, very dense, slow-growing, hard wood. And it's so dense that it actually sinks. And it's one of the few woods in the world that actually that sinks because it's so heavy. But when you put it in salt water, it naturally gets this kind of black patina. And this was removed from a 19th century English colonial house on the island of Borneo. And so I used it to divide the floors up and all that. And it just looks like it's been here for 1,000 years. It's that castle look. You know, when people come over for the first time, the outside of the house is really deceptive. It looks like a sort of Connecticut farmhouse. It's by the road. There's a barn. It looks like a farm. It's got bushes around it and things like that. The interior doesn't relate to the exterior. So it's usually sort of surprising that people, they come in and then they're suddenly like in this space, and then there's like this whole, like you're in a whole nother world. You're in some kind of like museum that you've just sort of like stumbled into. I suppose the best compliment is someone bursting into tears because they think it's so beautiful. It's the surprise and the inspiration that you want to, that's the achievement. When someone gets inspired, you know, and they can dream and they can imagine, and it encourages them to like think differently and be who they are. You know, there's no right way or wrong way of doing anything. This is just simply how I like to do it. And I don't recommend it for my friends, but, you know, this is what makes me happy, and that's why I do it. Now we'll go to the library. This is the old part of the house. It's all sort of old, but this is the part of the house that's intact, that was basically the same layout as when I bought it. The walls had all been like overpainted and wallpapered and pretty ghastly. So I spent months with a single-edged razor blade scraping the ceilings and the walls down to like original paint colors, which is kind of cool. And then I tried to mix my own colors to sort of like bring those colors throughout the entire rooms. And this is my library. This is the room where Betty lives. Betty's taken up residence here. This is her assisted living. This is where I bring her food and water every morning, and I give her treats every evening. And according to Michael, my husband, she's the best brushed cat in America because she gets brushed twice a day. And she's 17 years old, and she's retired on her tuffet, and she's very cute. But it's also the library. I had the cases made by a cabinet maker I know in Jakarta, and it's all salvage teak, and he builds things in the same way that they do during the 19th century. Everything's dovetailed together. Everything's got chamfered backs. It's very classic cabinetry making, and he does a beautiful, beautiful job. Except he built it for a square room, and an 18th century house isn't a square room. So the cabinets were all square, but the room isn't. So I had to buy like hacksaws and things like that and cut off the ends of the cabinets to actually fit them into the room. But it looks like it's been here forever. And I like these like vitrines. It's a window in front of a window. When we were little, we lived outside of Berlin, and there was a house and they had winter gardens. And this is just kind of a classic thing, except the Germans would grow like geraniums in here, and I've just had my collection of skeletons in here. And here we've got another cat skeleton, and on the label it says it's a skeleton of a tomcat. And then we've got fish skeletons, and there's goat skeletons, and a miniature horse skeleton, and a French dog, and a chicken. So we've got all kinds of things. And it's a really pretty room, and it's relaxing to be in here. The mirror came from my friend Brooke Hayward. I made them for her apartment in the city. And when they sold the apartment, they couldn't get them out. So Sotheby's didn't want them. So anyway, I went and I got them. But I made them years before using old back bars out of Chicago and then just framing them with architectural moldings so that they look good. They look nice. And again, part of my collection of dead plants, bushes that didn't make it through the winter. The chairs are French, 18th century, actually quite nice and quite comfortable. It's a nice winter room to be in. It's nice to sort of sit here and, it's warm, it's cozy, the morning sun comes flooding in, and I can hang out with Betty. So this is Betty. This is Betty. She's a grandma. This was dropped off here 11 years ago by someone who said that she should be euthanized because I wouldn't have time to take care of her. And I didn't think that that was right to do, and I didn't think it was her fault that they were an idiot. So she's been here and happy ever since. I'm a co-chairman for a local animal shelter that's based out of West Cornwall called the Little Guilds. And we've been trying to raise money to build a new shelter because the shelter they were in was a really decrepit ranch house that had been converted and added onto, and really depressing and really hard to clean and hard to heat. And the volunteers are having a hard time, keeping it maintained. And so in order to raise money, I've done big party events here for them, and I've done garden tours in my garden in West Cornwall. And Michael, my husband, he's doing a horse jumping event in a couple of weeks, all to sort of raise money and bring awareness to them. And my cat Iris, which is at the shop, she came from the Little Guilds, and she's one of 3 cats I've had from the Little Guild. So I'm blaming everything on Iris, that it's costing me a small fortune in all of these things and time. This is what I call the black and white room. Because there's 2 sitting rooms, it was just easy to make one a library. And this is really where Michael and I, we watch television. So we spend a lot of time in here. And the main feature in here is there's a giant frieze that was done by Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney in around late teens, early 20s. And she was a woman of means. The Whitney Museum is named for her. And she was quite a well-known sculptor. And for a woman to be working in that medium at that time is rather unusual, and it was only because she was so talented and she was also so wealthy that she didn't get a lot of pushback, but not a lot of women did that. There's 3 friezes, and this was 2, and I've put them together to make one that fits, but they actually were made to go together. And it must have been so it went up a staircase or some kind of landing. And it's allegorical. I'm sure it's telling a story, but nobody in the family knows what the story is or anything about it. And these are plasters, and they were made as an example but they were never cast in bronze, because I don't think she got the commission. But they're rather extraordinary, and they're just beautiful. And it's sort of the fact that it's all nudes in the 20s was a fairly open-minded period. but still for the 1920s, it's pretty kind of frisky for that kind of thing. But it's great. I love the way that they're all kind of moving in that direction and looking in that direction. And the first figure, her elbow went outside of the frame, so I just cut a hole through the wall, and her elbow's on the other side of the wall. This guy was missing his arm, and he was missing the half of his arm on this frieze. And I did have a sculptor in Cincinnati make the two missing arms, which he did a beautiful job. I just need to get some fireplace ashes to sort of color that up a little bit. When people come in this room, it's they're not expecting this like life-size group of people to be up against the wall, and it's sort of a little surprising, and but it makes you very intimate with it, and I think that it's got a really powerful impact, and I think it just sort of takes people's breath away, and they're impressed by it, but also there's something that people often laugh when they sort of see it, because it's sort of like they weren't expecting it. So it's good. It's when you're watching television, you're never alone. The frame photographs are my old assistant, Rachel, who does all my work for my website. And she does also art photography, and she does beautiful work. The coffee table I had made in Indonesia by my friend Bing, who also made the bookcases. And again, it's using the Java, they call it Java stone there, but it's really Belgian blue stone. And it just makes a nice surface. The carpet is from Iran. It's a tribal carpet. The table in the corner is white marble, and it's 17th, 18th century Chinese, and it's just sort of folklore, but white marble was reserved for the Forbidden City in Peking, and so it would have been like a garden table or something like that from that. Again, there's more pieces of shipwreck pottery that's kind of kicking around. It's a hat from a whirling dervish from Istanbul, which is actually pretty cool. And this is mud cloth, and then is also from the Congo. And the curtains are from Bhutan, and it's a raw silk. And these are Buddhist monk shawls. And friends of mine in Ipswich used to travel to Nepal every year, and there were Tibetan traders and traders coming down from the Himalayas, trading in textiles and things like that. So for probably 30 years, I've been buying these Buddhist monk shawls, and I decided to make curtains out of them. But they're really cool. They're sort of like beautiful. It's almost like a plum colored, and this very sort of like natural color. Simple and nice, and they feel nice, and they have a nice fringe on them. And here's our kitchen. It's just been kind of made out of old parts and things like that I had lying around. The windows are from the original house, which I removed and put in nice insulated windows, but the windows were too pretty, so I decided to make the cabinets out of them. The walnut and the pine doors are old French armoires that I had pieces of, so I cut them up and made doors out of them. I've got a collection of Venetian glass, and I've got some big stacks of Danish plates that I bought in Indonesia years and years ago. Bits and pieces of 18th and 19th century glassware. Most of the rest of the glassware is at the shop in West Cornwall. The walls are covered in French tile. It's called parfait, and it comes from the south of France, and it's this kind of blonde color. It kind of looks like it's old cut stone, and that's kind of cool. The big doors in the pantry, they're old French doors that came out of a house that I worked on in the south of France. And it's sort of like it hides a multitude of sins. You can see there's snack stereos, there's a microwave, there's everything inside of here. That's why we keep the door closed. This is what we would call a hardy orange, and I had 2 of them, and I bought these years ago and had them in a bucket outside of my door in West Cornwall. And obviously they died, so they're not all that hardy. But they're sort of more attractive dead than they are alive. They have these kind of aggressive thorns on them, which I had a wedding at my shop years ago, and the bridesmaids were all getting entangled in these. So I'm not sure I recommend it for growing in a pot. Well, I think we should go to the terrace now, and I'll show you what's going on out there. This is the back terrace. It's sort of like there wasn't really anything here when I bought it, so all of the stonework and the columns and all that kind of stuff are all part of it. But what was here that was so incredible is the land. The land here is exceptionally beautiful, and it's these very sort of soft rolling hills, and it's unlike any land I know of around here in Connecticut. And I grew up in southern Ohio, and in southern Ohio there's an area that kind of looks like this. So for me, it's a little like being in Ohio without really having to be there. And that's kind of good because my business is here. But I just find this landscape really, really beautiful. And this is called the Oblong Valley. And there's a plate that has like Connecticut on it and a plate that has New York State. And this is where the 2 plates have met. And all the stones that way in Connecticut are all granite, and all the stones that way in New York State are schist. And New York is right on the other side of those trees, so I'm really right on the border. When I bought this house, there was this kind of terrible walkway in the front. There was like old stones, and one of the stones that I had sort of pulled up, it was like an old Indian, it must have been for like ceremonial purposes, for like grinding maize and herbs and things like that. There was like an oval sort of indentation and a round indentation, and then these scored like rings in it. And so I think this must have been an Indian sort of land or Indian encampment at some point, in the way back time before the settlers came. And the early settlers around here, like 1730s, because it's soft and rolling and there's not a lot of rock in it, it would have been easier to farm. And that's why I think the Indians were here. And I think it's really their land that we're walking on. I made the pergola, and these stone columns I had carved in France. I'd copied an 11th century sort of like colonnade that was behind a monastery outside of a little town called Bonnières at Saint-Hilaire. And they're just very sort of simple, Gothic looking. And then my old assistant Julien found these in his village, which is in the Centre-Massif in South Central France, and they're early 17th century, but they're great. They're kind of similar, and they look good, and they're the right proportion. I had to like make bases for them to like get them a little higher, and then I just took barn timbers, and the original barn timbers were the timbers that I pulled out of the house to put up at the top, but I've had to replace them because they weren't planning on them to be outside for years and years and years, so they've been rotting. So I had to like upgrade to oak. The stone table I designed and I had carved in France. The chairs are 19th century Dutch colonial out of Jakarta. Here's another table I designed and I had made in France. The benches are Dutch colonial. Everyone thinks that they think they're pews, but they're not really pews. In the tropics, it's so hot and they have big open verandas around their houses. And in the heat of the day, they would go home and they would nap on these benches after lunch. And then they would get up after the sun started to go down and it cooled off and then finish their day at work. That's in the 19th century. So. And here is, I love water and I love the sound of water. And one thing this property doesn't have is water. And I was born in Maine on the coast and I've lived on rivers and West Cornwall's on a river. But so I have water features. And this is my plunge pool. So after work, it's nice to sort of like jump in and cool off and wake up and feel refreshed. And it's nice to have like the little sound from the fountain kind of trickling through. The fountain is American, it's Art Deco, 1925, something like that, just simple cement. But I think I love that kind of just pure, simplistic, nice, quiet, easygoing. It's a very nice place to hang out. These big stones and things like that. They're 19th century sidewalks out of New York State. And they're like these big, great, cool stones. And it just helps to make it look like it's been here a long time, much longer than it has been. This type of pruning is called espalier, and it's a French form of, everyone thinks it's tree torture, but the philosophy behind it is you remove all the excess, you keep the trees that are kind of growing in these like lines, and you keep them short, and you also have the branches so that they come down slightly so that all the sap is actually running into the fruit. And the French will pick off like a third of the fruit that is on the tree so that the fruit that's left on the tree is better and bigger quality. And this way it keeps air circulation around the fruit, so it's just a much better product. And it not only does it look good, but it tastes good, and there's a real philosophy behind this. This is the backyard. It's a pretty backyard, but it's the backyard. And yes, I do hang my clothes and I dry them. I hate using clothes dryers and things like that. In the house, there's only a few things that are remnants of what was here before I bought it. And one of the things is the swing. And the swing came with the property. It's quite nice. It's on this maple tree, which I think is actually sort of a beautiful tree. It's unusual because it's an ancient maple, but it's a miniature. And so it's grown quite small, but it has this like cool shape. And that's, it's just nice. And it's nice to sort of come out here and swing. And when I have parties, I also have like lots of people that are swinging back and forth and little old ladies picking up young men and things like that. So it's like, I'm not responsible. But no, it's fun. And I've never thought of taking it down, and I'm very happy that it's here and that the ropes haven't broken yet. So I'm not going to test it. This land, sometime in the 19th century, they had filled this area to bring it up because there's wetlands back here, and this was a way of keeping this area a little drier. That garage originally used to be somewhere around in here. So when I bought the property, the garage was in the front of the barn, and then I got a crane and I moved it to the back of the barn. So slowly it's getting back to where it was originally. But I built all of these walls, or I had these walls built by the guys that work for me, and they do a beautiful job. And they look like they've been here a long time, but it separates the Mother Nature's area, which is on the other side of that wall, to the lawn area. And the nice thing about the stone walls and the terraces, the walls are big, but I just let the ivy grow on them, and it kind of softens them, and it makes them look like they've been here. It's not so heavy with the masonry. It's got a sort of a more subtle approach to it. The benches also came out of central France, and they're nice. They're 17th century stone, but it's good, and it's a nice place to sit and look back at the house, and it's a good view. And my world is in the back and in the inside, and I leave the front looking more and more like Connecticut, like the rest of the road. Not trying to draw too much attention this direction. The field right now, it's kind of late summer, and so you get goldenrod, and you've got cattails. The tall stuff back there is phragmites. That's a bad thing, but it used to be all the way up to here, and I've been sort of cutting it back, so forcing it back, and hopefully the cattails will get rid of it. In my barn, I have barn swallows, and they feed on all the mosquitoes and all the bugs that come out every evening and every morning, and they just do this kind of ballet of swooping down and cleaning everything up, and it's really, really nice. But now there's color. I started planting this row of zinnias and cosmos and sunflowers. It's a Midwestern kind of garden-y thing. It takes me back to Ohio, but I rather like it. It's it's kind of fun. The colors are a little shocking. Since it's a farm, I decided to use things that one might find on the farm. So on the pergola, I've got grapes growing. I've made all of my fences out of apple trees. It's beautiful, but it's somewhat appropriate for agricultural. The upfront costs of doing a garden like this are high because it's all structural, and it's all they're all things that are going to stay that way. But then maintaining it, there's not a lot of, the beds are this narrow. I don't have time to get involved in big gardening projects here. So I've made it intentionally to be very simple and very easy to maintain. The boxwoods are pruned once a year. The apples are pruned twice a year. It was a really good spring for the apples, and so a lot of them are heavy in fruit, which is kind of good. And there's probably 6 or 7 different varieties. We've got these, it's nice. These look like they came out of the Wizard of Oz somehow. They were rejects from a job that I did. So not only were the apples very prolific, it's a very good year for the hydrangea. They're looking quite robust for this season. So it's good. They smell nice. And basically gardening is a series of rooms, and you move from one room to the next room to the next room to the next room. So this is like going up a corridor. And here we have the other water feature. This one is for the fish. So I've got goldfish in here, and I've got water lilies, and the water lilies are in bloom, which is nice. And here I used a piece of 19th century bluestone, which actually was the floor of a prison in Massachusetts in 1840. But that's the bridge, so that's kind of nice and cool. The columns are Roman, and the bench I had carved in the south of France. It's very peaceful. It's nice to sort of sit here. And when I'm waiting for someone to arrive, I'll often sit here because the sun will come in onto the bench and no one can see you and it's very peaceful. The big pot is from Crete, 19th century. It was for olive oil. And then we have our more boxwoods. And I think we'll go and check out the bedroom. This is the bedroom. Well, this is our bedroom. This is where we sleep. And it's actually sort of one of my favorite rooms. I like this room very much. I love waking up here because I wake up and I look out and I look out onto the land and the field, and it's a little like being at the sea because it looks different every single day and every single morning. You know, recently there's a lot of fog, and so it kind of like it drifts in like these fingers that kind of overlap through. And then, you know, sometimes you can't see the willow tree in the back pasture, and then as the fog burns off, you know, this silhouette starts coming and it starts exposing itself. It's at the back of the house, so it's quiet. And, you know, I've kind of layered it in lots of sort of textiles and things like that. The walls are covered in 18th century Ottoman ikat, and the carpet is 18th century from Anatolia. The bed is it's a Dutch colonial bed out of Sumatra, and it came in this kind of wonderful candy apple red color, which I think is really great. The driftwood, it's a piece of root from Borneo, and it's teak, and it was just weathered by being along a riverbed for years and years and years and years, and it's kind of softened it into these kind of wonderful shapes. But it's one of those things, you know, when you wake up and you're having your coffee, you can kind of look at it and sort of see, you know, flames flickering or something like that. And the chest belonged to my parents. It's part of my inheritance. And they bought it when they were first married, so it's nice. It actually holds a lot of stuff, and it's made out of birch, and it comes from a Chicago manufacturer, but simple and sturdy, and you know, a little on the modern side, but it's okay. It's fine. You know, it's a Turkish perde I use as a headboard, and that's that kind of like striped cloth, and they're woven in strips and then they're sewn together. And originally for nomadic people, they're moving their tents, you know, from place to place, and they use these as the walls in the tents to separate, you know, one space from another space. And again, there's another one of those giant mirrors from my friend Brooke that I had made years ago, sold to her, and then they wound back in my hands, which is very good. And this is the bathroom, and in here I've covered the walls in 19th century teak from a house in Jakarta, and the floor is an 18th century courtyard floor from China, and it's a granite, and it has like a little bit of pink in it. My friend Tom did the collages, and I love his work. It's all throughout the house, and it's in West Cornwall as well. It's simple, it's nice, it works. These cabinets came out of a New York service kitchen. They're old St. Charles cabinets, and I was offered them by some people who told me that they were going to throw them away if I didn't buy them. And I said, well, why don't I let you throw them away and then I'll just take them? And then I offered to actually give them half the money if I sold any, and I did sell some, but which is pretty good. But it's sort of like, they think they're garbage unless I want to buy them. I thought that was an interesting sort of It's all those things. But it's nice. There's a view of the terrace through the windows. The breeze kind of like blows through here. It makes a nice place to sleep and a nice place to wake up. And I wake up at 5 and I have my coffee for an hour in bed, and I just start thinking about what I have to do during the day. And this is a nice, inspiring place to do it. So for a living, people ask me this all the time, and I tell them I make people's dreams come true. I've been an antique dealer for a long, long time. I used to do lots of antique shows all over the country and flea markets. I've had a shop in West Cornwall since 1990. I studied landscape architecture, and it was in the School of Architecture. I went to Ohio State, and I really, really, really hated it and dropped out in my junior year. And I had been doing tapestry weaving to keep my grade level up at that point. And I've always had a penchant for textiles. And when I moved to West Cornwall, I did a garden there. And from that garden, people wanted me to do their gardens, and their friends wanted me to do their gardens, and on and on and on. So I do garden design, and it's a business basically by word of mouth. I design furniture. I salvage a lot of architectural things. I started doing that a long time ago, mainly because there were lots of beautiful things that were just getting thrown away, that weren't being appreciated. And you could find really cool stuff that was historically significant and was just being used as landfill. And it made me crazy, so I just started to buy it at salvage yards, and I would take it to antique shows, and I would, market it that way. And people would be like, oh, this is really cool, but, what do you do with it, when I get it home? And so in this house, I've used a lot of salvage things to show people, well, you can do your floors. You can take, old shutters and you can make the doors out of those. You can use the old windows to make, cabinets out of them. You can use, it's all recycling, but it's recycling with really cool stuff. But it's saving the planet, and it's smart and it's intelligent. It's also, you can't get this quality anymore. You can't get the quality of the wood anymore. It just doesn't exist because we've over harvested everything. And the few places that you still get old growth lumber, we should leave alone because it's helping save the planet. And the other main business that I have now is garden design. So I also, I do people's gardens, and then I also dabble in architecture because it's all kind of the same to me. It's all inside and outside, and the inside should relate to what's going on the outside, and it's creating rooms outside like you have them inside. It's the understanding of flowing from one space to another space, and it should be interesting, and it should feel seamless. And that's what I do, and that's what I try and do for my clients. And some people only know me for doing gardens. Some people only know me for an antique shop. Some people only know me for doing, interiors. And I can do them all, but it depends upon what the person wants. I can show you a bit of what I do, because the antique side of it, and sort of the salvaged architectural side of it, is in the barn and is just outside the door. So let's go. One of the things that sold me on this property was the amount of cement that was here. Because I had a house in Falls Village, and I had a stone yard there that was all gravel. And I have a forklift, and the forklift I was getting stuck in the gravel. And getting a forklift unstuck is a really unpleasant task. So when I saw all of this cement here, I thought, this is a fortune. This is great. This is mine. I want it. So it really was. It was a big selling point, and it was a dairy barn. And so they've got these like graded things in the cement so the cows don't slip, and you can wash it down with the hose. And there used to be a big like metal barn here that was 100 feet long, but now this is where I keep my stone, and I call it the stone yard. And it's sort of like because I do all kinds of projects, and I need sort of, if you're doing a project, you need enough to like complete the project. When I find really cool old stones, I just buy them. And, you know, this is all 19th century bluestone that comes from New York State. And that's granite curbing, and that comes from Connecticut, and there's curbing along streets is really what it is. There's a large pile. This is the 17th century Belgian bluestone. This is all the flooring, like is in the house. It just doesn't have a polish on it. So if you get it wet, it turns into that sort of beautiful, sort of like charcoal gray, and some pieces have like nautilus shells and brain coral and things like that. And there's a selection of iron bits. You never know if you're going to need something at the drop of a hat. The giant capitals, they came off a building in Washington, D.C., 19th century. It kind of gives you an idea of how large the building must have been, because those capitals are gigantic. And in the back there, that's pool coping. That's 18th century French, and it does a round pool. And it must have been outside of a kitchen, because in some of the stones you can see where they've taken their knives and they've sharpened them for, hundreds of years, of sharpening the knives, because it's a sandstone. There's American, 19th century, rings like a bell. Round tables, always important to know where your round tables are. Rectangular tables, big tables, giant pots. The giant pots came out of the Vanderbilt Whitney studio. Those are really big Italian pots. It's for an estate, I suppose. I've got cobblestones in the back. I've got another big stone table. This is half of a lychee tree. It comes from Indonesia, and it's probably one of the heaviest things that I've ever bought in my life. When I tried to get it out of the container, I thought it would come out. Then I had to get the forklift and chains and things like that and drag it. But it's solid burl. So if you ever wondered where lychees come from, that is where it is. We've got bits and pieces. We've got French pots and big cauldrons. Balusters from New Hampshire. This is the front of a bank. It's brown granite with limestone capitals. Rather pretty. These are from Java. They make nice fountains, slightly modern feeling. Bases from East Bali, made out of coral stone. And then we can go inside. This is really why I wanted to have this property. I thought it was beautiful, I thought it was wonderful, but the barns in Connecticut are few and far between, because farming just sort of went out in the early 20th century. There are not that many around, and there's not that many barns left. And growing up in Ohio, there were a dime a dozen. So this is this wonderful space. This barn, this part of the barn, this is the big barn, is late 19th century. It's probably 1880s, 1890s. And the thing is, it's all cedar. It's like 1.5 inch thick cedar boards that make up the entire barn. And cedar now is like $10 a linear foot. So It's like $1 billion worth of cedar. But and I think they use cedar basically for hygienic reasons. Cedar, you know, it keeps moths out of your clothes and things like that. But I think it also has other purposes that maybe were good for dairy cows. In here, I try and keep it organized because I hate disorder, and I have that kind of German military Midwestern background, which everything, you know, my father always said a place for everything and everything in its place. And so this section is filled with jars. And they're Tunisian jars, and they're Peloponnesian jars, and there's Portuguese and Indonesian and Balinese. These are some corners from they're Roman, first century. Here I have tiles. There's encaustic tiles, which encaustic is it's cement that's fired. Encaustic is firing. And some are glazed, some are yellow, some are, you know, they're hexagonal shaped or octagonal shaped with cabochons and all that kind of stuff. The parfois, the French that I have my walls covered with in my kitchen is back in here. Some rolls of bamboo from Marrakesh. In this area, I've got all shipwreck pottery. And this I just bought, and it's probably the nicest assortment of shipwreck pottery that I have come across in one fell swoop from shopping. And, you know, it goes from Tang Dynasty, Sung Dynasty. There's also, it's Swankalat, which is Thai, and Sukhothai. And those are both Thai potteries, but they're all happening at the same time period. And the ships would go around India, they would hit Thailand, they would go to Vietnam, and then they would go to China, and then they would cross the Malacca Straits into Indonesia to trade. So your ships, these are small ships, and they would be laden with stuff that they picked up in all these different countries, and they're trading at every port that they went to. And so on one ship, you'll find stuff from like 5 different countries. And that's sort of why it has this kind of mix of stuff to it. But the shapes and patinas are really fabulous. They're really lovely. Here I like to keep my lighting, and behind it is sort of like general bases, pedestals, you know, stands, side tables, stools, kind of cool wooden things, more stools on this side. Chandeliers are bopping around this way and that way. Those are the smaller jars. These are like the bigger jars, which is more of the Cretan jars. There's some Peloponnesian jars. Floor lamps, it's hard to find a good lamp, so we always have lots of floor lamps. And here, these are again old windows that I salvaged and kind of just made doors out of them. And it's the same in the carpet room. They're just windows that I was like trying to save. Here's another lychee tree. I'm fond of these like lychee trees, except this one's hollow and it doesn't weigh nearly as much. And all the raffia or hanging lights that I had made in Marrakesh, and they're like really cool. The light that comes through them is really wonderful, and as a collection in a group, they're pretty wonderful. They're kind of nice. They're beautifully done. They're beautifully made. I mean, it's raffia that's been like twisted, and I don't know. I'm not sure how people do those things. We love pots and jars. We have all this green stuff. It's from Borneo, and it's a great color. It goes from like blue to green, and it's got a little bit of purple like dripping in it. And here, these are French. So you kind of see this sort of like, they're very, very similar, and glaze and all that kind of stuff. And the English used to do green glazes as well on their pottery for plates and things like that, except they made their glaze with arsenic. And the people, the ceramicists, wouldn't live past like the age of 25. So that's why you don't find as much. My greatest find in here is the barn itself. I buy a lot of stuff, obviously, you can tell. And my greatest find is going to be very different from someone else's find. That's why I let people poke around in here on their own accord, because for them, it's their discovery. I refer to the barn as Aladdin's cave, because if someone's looking for something, I can usually produce it or a relative. But the barn itself is what gives me the greatest pleasure. And finding it and being able to purchase it and living next to it and saving it, that's the real gift. And the barn swallows have just left. They just migrated back to South America. And they're these beautiful, lovely little birds, and they're endangered because of loss of habitat. And they build these little nests, and they're up on the eaves, and they build them out of like straw and mud. And they have their broods of birds in here. And they teach them to fly inside of the barn before they'll take them outside. So the mother's giving them like little flying lessons, and she'll take them upstairs, and they're flying around in there. And they do go to the bathroom on all of the merchandise. And I really don't care, because I love the barn swallows. And early August, mid-August, they just start massing, and then they're gone. And that's what they did. And now it's quiet in here, and I sort of like miss all their chatter, and they're like swooping in and out, and their sort of busyness. But it's nice to be able to share my world with them, because I feel they were here before I was, and they always come back. So that's good. So this is the upstairs. This was a loft. This was filled with hay. When I bought it, it had about 3 to 4 feet of rotted hay up here. There was holes in the roof. There's a big hole here. That's why I put the staircase here, is because the floors are already rotted. So the building inspector asked why I needed such large staircase. And the guy that was helping me said that I hire a lot of ladies, so they need a double wide staircase to haul the furniture up and down, which wasn't exactly true. But anyway, this now it took 300 gallons of paint to paint this, because it just soaked it up and soaked it up and soaked it up. But it's a little like being in a cathedral in some kind of funny way, or inside some of a ship that's turned upside down just because of the shape of the roof. And up here I have a lot of, this is the Dutch colonial furniture that I buy in Indonesia. And I love these benches. I find them the most comfortable benches. I use them on terraces, I use them on porches, I use them on screen porches, I use them in houses. They're very versatile. And then there's a giant pile of Tuareg carpets. And they come, basically the Tuaregs are in Mauritania, and they go all the way to Algeria. They're in the Sahara, and they're sort of nomads. And the carpets are leather and straw. And they're just beautifully made and beautifully done. And they're sort of modern, but tribally, and great color. They're sort of straw colored and leather, and they're interesting patterns. They're been using a lot of those recently. And this is where I keep big tables and medium tables. There's Spanish ones, Portuguese ones, there's French ones. But if I'm looking for a table, this is where I'll come. Behind the tables, we've got upholstered furniture. I buy that in France. They're all like 19th, early 20th century. Very comfortable, slightly small scale, which is nice for an apartment. And since we're outside of Manhattan, There's a lot of people in city apartments that need sort of small scale. The painted panels, it's a 16th century ceiling from Genoa in Italy, which I think is pretty wonderful. I don't know exactly how to use it yet, but I'll figure it out. In here, I keep my case pieces. We've got, cabinets with shelves, French. This is 19th century French. It's a little faux bois. We can, buffet, storage, coffee tables and console tables. English, big cabinets. This is sort of, these are out of Jakarta, and it's like mid-century modern. But I think it's just a useful sort of way of organizing it. This is English. It's called a coffer, 17th century. You keep all your goods in there. This is the round table section. Stools, coffee tables, from all over. And then beds, giant frames, more stuff. You never know when you're going to need something. So, my advice for decorating, I would say just buy what you love, buy what makes you happy, and if you just do that, it becomes consistent because you have a consistent taste, and then it all kind of works together. It doesn't matter, how old it is or where it came from or whatever, but it just kind of, it'll like mesh together. Sometimes if something doesn't work the way it is, if you just change the color, you can get it to work. But I say have fun. I say, enjoy yourself. Don't be afraid of it. And if you don't like it, you can just change it. It should be an enjoyable process. It should be a pleasant process. It should be a rewarding process. It should be something that brings you joy. And there isn't any right way or wrong way of doing it. You should just do it and be happy. Well, Homeworthy, that was fun. Thank you for coming, and I've got to go back to work, so we'll see you later.
Today on Homeworthy, we're visiting a beautiful colonial home in Sharon, Connecticut, where we'll meet Dana and Fritz Rohn of Montage Antiques. Once in need of desperate repair, Dana and Fritz have spent the past several years renovating their home and decorating it with fabulous treasures. As passionate collectors for the past 40 years, the couple has accumulated wonderful antiques, everything from impressive works of art, some of which Fritz has painted himself, to worldly objects. Enjoy!
Hi, Homeworthy. I'm Dana.
And I'm Fritz.
Welcome to our beautiful colonial home in Connecticut. Come on in.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hi, I'm Dana Jennings Rohn. We're here at this wonderful house that we've renovated in Sharon, Connecticut, and we've filled it with antiques.
And I am Fritz Rohn, Dana's husband, and very happy to be living in this beautiful house. We are in the antiques business and buy and sell antiques and love what we do. And we love old, beautiful things and have collected many, many over the years and
Loads.
Have them in this house.
So I found this house because I'm a complete real estate-aholic. I can't let a house go by without looking at it, and I'm constantly scrolling on my phone looking at different opportunities around the area. And this one came on the market, and it was a wreck, and we immediately jumped on it. it was just such an exciting moment. And as you can see, Lizzie is fascinated by the whole story, aren't you, dear?
When we first came to the house, we knew immediately that we loved it. We've always loved these early houses. They just have so much character and charm. And when you see one that is in really a dilapidated state, your heart cries out. You really feel like you have to do something. And we also just knew that the location was wonderful. It has a wonderful view out the back. It's on a quiet road. The house sits prominently high with a stone retaining wall in front, complete with stone gate posts and two of the ubiquitous aged sugar maple trees in front. It was just an iconic New England country house.
However, it was in horrible condition, as I said earlier. And one of my favorite stories about when we first bought the house, we decided to have an empty house party. So we invited all our friends, and we invited our friend Rebecca, who was our realtor. She's a very dear friend. And she and I and our other friend, Natalie, were standing in what was an upstairs bedroom, all of us with glasses of wine. And we were just chatting away, and suddenly the floor gave way, and Rebecca, the realtor, went right through the floor and her foot came out in the living room. The thing about this house was the last time that it got a good do-over was in the 80s. And they put on a kind of ubiquitous sunroom, and they decorated with lots of, avocado and harvest gold, and you get the picture. There was weird faded wallpaper, and there were lots of eagles involved. So it was pretty tacky and also incredibly tired. In the kitchen, there was a chandelier that didn't have any shades, and they had little plastic cups over the bulbs. So it was also kind of scary.
This room here, the front hall, we actually did not have to do much in. It was dilapidated. An alteration that they had done was to have the closet put here, only it was way out here, and it was an enormous space filled with heat ducts. So one thing that we did is to push this wall back and make the front hall larger and more gracious, and still keep a closet, but give it kind of a jib door, to which I have wonderfully found a 19th century gilt mirror that fit it perfectly, but it still is a wonderfully spacious closet, but quite hidden, so that it's still a gracious front hall and large enough for a piece of furniture here, because formerly it was only this deep. So it enlarged this room wonderfully. And we also did the carpeting. This is one room where the floor was not in very good condition, and so we have carpeted it and the stairway with sisal, which works very well.
It also keeps the dogs from falling down the stairs.
Yes, always very important.
So we made a kind of funny decision in the very beginning. We'd always used Benjamin Moore paints, and we decided to try Farrow and Ball. So as we walk around the house, you'll see we love a solid light color wall, and we like a contrasting trim. And so we chose all those colors from Farrow and Ball, and perhaps I'll be able to remember the actual names of the colors, or not. Anyway, my favorite part of this whole ensemble is the console and my beautiful lute player. The console is Italian, it's about 1780, and I just love all this beautiful original decorative paint. It's hard to find this stuff, it really is. And this is just perfectly scaled for this room. And she is just the epitome of who I want to be. She is so gracious and so peaceful and so creative with her beautiful gesture of her hand and those beautiful drapes.
It is a wonderful portrait, English, 1720, 1730, and I love its life size. It really is a real personality in the room. And although it's in a bit rough shape, it's got some discoloration here and some flaking here, it doesn't bother me a bit. She's got great character. She is alert, lively, with her wonderful hairdo interspersed with a rope of pearls and this beautiful lute, and her fingers are so beautifully done. A curious thing is that, and you don't notice it because it is mostly finished, but it is in fact not completely finished. If you look closely, you can see how the lute is completely a flat color compared with the fine modulation of the hands. And you can see he never got to the lute to give it any kind of color, any gesture, any sense of the nature of the wood that it is made out of. It is certainly unfinished. But the important parts are the hands, the face, the beautiful fabrics, the bit of light in the distance. It's a wonderful thing and really evocative of that period. We do love portraits. This is a series of 18th century prints of self-portraits of artists, which I've been collecting for I don't know how many years, 40 or 50 years, and they're rare. You don't find very many. I think I've got about 30 of them now.
Most of them are in the closet.
And they were put out by the Uffizi Museum in the 1700s. They are hand-colored copper plate engravings. And the Uffizi has an incredible collection of these paintings that were of self-portraits of artists, which of course is a wonderful theme. And they have been collecting them since the 1600s. And in the 18th century, they did this series of prints, and you don't find many of them, but they're beautiful things, and they're a pleasure to have.
And Fritz found lots.
The tapestry that you see here, this long, narrow panel, is actually an amalgam. It's an interesting thing that was done in the early part of the 20th century, where they would take fragments of very fine bits of tapestry, which had been cut off or rotted off, and these were sections, and they pieced them together. So you can see this is a beautiful figure here. It looks like it's autumn with the scythe to cut hay with, but it ends here, and this is another figure here, flanked by two caryatid figures, and yet it's interspersed very artfully here to all this floral aspect, which is a border piece from another tapestry. And way down at the bottom, we have even another wonderful piece. And this one is from the late 1500s, and it's these two figures in Elizabethan dress walking in a woodland landscape with a bit of a caryatid figure along the right-hand side here, and you can see at the top where it is artfully stitched together at the bottom of yet another piece with a figure which has nothing to do with it. His waist ends here, but it makes a wonderful object to have, and there is nothing like the tones of these early needleworks. The wonderful soft hues are just beautiful.
So I think we've seen a lot of the front hall. I think it's time for us to move into the living room, which is chock full of stuff. Come on.
And it's a beautiful room.
So here we are in the living room. Now, it's really full of stuff, and the reason it's full of stuff is because we are antique dealers. We have been collecting for, about 40 years, I think, together.
At least.
And separately before that, we've been in the antiques business since 1987 in various iterations and incarnations around the general vicinity here. We've had a number of different shops and we used to do shows and all kinds of things. So we're old hat at that. And the big thing about our house is that the decorating stems from the collecting. So the first thing that you notice is that we have tons of stuff on all the shelves. It's because we're passionate about various things. We have such a wide-ranging interest. And so there different collections of stuff in different places, and they've come from all over, and we've collected them over years and years of just passionate collecting, as well as we're in the business, so we have a lot of opportunity too.
And even though we do love things and we do fill our houses with all these wonderful things, I always want to keep in mind that every room has to be comfortable and lived in. Every chair has to be very comfortable. We especially love these wonderful down cushion upholstered pieces where you really can just be very comfortable and sit, although we don't actually sit that much. We're always very busy.
We joke about we're chair farmers. We collect chairs, but we never sit down.
We work very hard. We love what we do.
Yeah.
And the result is that we do end up spending a lot of time working, but it's what happens when you love what you're doing.
It's a pleasure.
But even though you collect all these things, you do need to keep your house being a wonderful place to live that you're comfortable in, where your friends can come in and not be afraid to sit down and lounge in a chair. That's important. You have to be able to enjoy your day.
Yeah, and there's a certain edit to what we do. I mean, as we get further into it, you'll get a sense of, it isn't just a random array. There's such a big movement right now for maximalism, and I kind of have a problem with that, because it's almost like having your house be full of stuff for the sake of having your house be full of stuff, which is different than what we do. What we do is that we actually curate our collections. And yes, it is densely decorated, but that is because we have been doing this for so long and we're so passionate. And so those kinds of movements, minimalism, maximalism, that's kind of a superficial way of looking at interior design. I think that for people who are visual, who love art, it goes way deeper than that.
Another thing that I think is interesting to point out, and that is that although we do love antiques and old things, we do have some modern art and modern things around.
Absolutely.
And you can mix them successfully, but you have to think about how you do it. For instance, if we might just take a look over here, amidst all our old master paintings, there's this wonderful, very abstract 20th century painting done by an old friend of mine, but the tones go with the room. The figure is a human size, it's a scale, it goes with other things. Contemporary painting of brilliant colors would not do well in this room. It would do well in perhaps our sunroom, which has more brilliant colors. But it's not merely using antique things. You also have to pay attention to bringing modern things in, or anything that you love. I love the painting, which is why it's here. But you have it in a place where it goes with the room. So maximalism is a way of adding all these things together that go in the scheme of the whole room, although they may be hundreds of years apart in their making and in a different style. And that's a very important thing in decorating a room, I find.
One of the things about colonial homes in their original state is that they were a series of small rooms. And the difference in this house is that at some point, probably in the 20th century, walls were removed, which caused this living room to be one room. It's very likely that it was 3 rooms, maybe only 2, but probably 3. And so when we were making the designs for the room and sort of the traffic flow and the seating areas, we really thought about it as 3 different spaces. So at this end, we have sort of a library feeling. We have our game table, which sometimes doubles as a kind of intimate dinner party scene. And we use this space all the time. When we have big family parties, there are people here playing cards or doing puzzles. And we can clear it out, we can add chairs, and it's actually my favorite place for a winter dinner with another couple, because it's very intimate and it's close to the fireplace and it's really cozy. So then we come to the middle section of the living room, and we have our fireplace. And so we've created this kind of seating area around the fireplace. So this in some way really functions as the main heart of our living room. It's a wonderful cozy spot. We put hors d'oeuvres on the table and everybody kind of gathers around the fireplace. We've designed it this way because the room didn't work well using it in larger chunks. It made sense to divide the room into 3 unique spaces. And down in this end is actually what I like to think of as Fritz's office or library. That's Fritz's desk over there. And he's a book collector, among many other things. And so all of that is here. And this really functions as a completely separate space.
Works beautifully with a wonderful view of the yard outside, and it faces south so the sun pours in. So we do love these old master paintings, and we have collected many over the years. This one here is actually one from my family. This is something my parents bought when I was a child. And it's interesting because it's an 18th century copy of a great Rubens painting. Rubens did a series of, I think it's about 20 paintings of Marie de Medici, which are now in the Louvre. And this is one of hers where she is fleeing Marseille. And he was so revered in the 18th and 19th centuries, Rubens was, that many artists did copies of his paintings. This, of course, was in the years before photography. So this is a version of Marie de Medici Fleeing Marseille by Rubens, done about 100 years later than Rubens painted it. He painted it in the 1620s, and I've always loved it. And we did put an 18th century frame on it, which it did not have earlier, but it really places it quite nicely together.
As you might imagine, as antique dealers, we gift each other antiques all the time. So every birthday, Christmas, whatever holiday, anniversary, one of us has something really marvelous to give to the other. So on this particular year, I was shopping with our daughters at a big antique fair, and I came upon this Egyptian foot. It's from an Egyptian tomb. It's a really wonderful carved wood piece with gesso, just the kind of thing you would find at the Met. And I was very excited, and I bought it to give to Fritz for his birthday. And I packed it away, and everybody was very excited about this purchase. So then, on Christmas morning, it was my turn to open a present from Fritz. And I unwrapped the box, I pulled the tissue out, and the girls were sitting here with us, and what should I pull out of the box but a pair of Egyptian feet that Fritz had bought for me because he knew I like antiquities. The girls and I were absolutely bursting, trying not to laugh. Both of our daughters were just, winking at me and chuckling, and I was like, shh, shh, quiet, stop. Finally, we got ourselves under control. Now, Fritz's birthday is 2 days after Christmas, so you can imagine my delight, actually double delight, in having him open this one. Because how many people come up with Egyptian feet for each other's presents in the same year? So the story of Fritz and our meeting is kind of amusing. We weren't antique dealers at that time, although we did both love going to flea markets. But I was baking desserts in my apartment kitchen, and Fritz was the chef at a restaurant where I happened to be selling my desserts at the back door. And this particular Memorial Day weekend, I came in with all of my torts and pies, and the manager was paying me out the back door, and he said, "Do you want to meet the chef?" I said, sure. So we walked into the kitchen, and behind the hotline, looking a bit stressed out, was this adorable man with this huge head of curly hair and a huge beard and these little round glasses, and he was as skinny as a rail. And he looked at me, and the manager said, "Fritz, this is Dana Jennings." And he blew me a kiss. So that was the fateful moment.
I don't know what came over me. That's not something I don't think I've ever done.
It's a little out of character, I must say.
And it was not, it was kind of across the room, too.
It was through the shelving units where they put the hot dishes up.
I was busy and working away. I mean, I think I had orders to cook, and Dana was over at the other end of the kitchen, and it just seemed the proper response. You
could say something like she was cute, but no, well, it's just the proper response.
She was, obviously. I had always loved antiques and art, and I was raised with nice things in the house, and I was always curious about them and always asked. And actually, I was a painter. I was an artist and was painting, and I was working in restaurants really to pay the bills, as making a living selling art is challenging, and at some point I realized I had sort of painted the paintings I felt I needed to paint and was ready to move on, and so went into the antiques business. But my career in the restaurant kitchens was, although I always have loved to eat well, it was really a way of supporting myself, and my heart was not in it.
Little different for my story. I grew up in the antiques business. My grandparents were dealers. My parents were dealers. So I sort of grew up in the shop. I grew up at the shows. And honestly, I was determined never to be an antique dealer. in my 20s, but I loved to cook. So I ended up, going to culinary school and having a series of different jobs, mainly in pastry, but I did a lot of other things. And when we started dating, we spent all our time going to flea markets and going to antique fairs and, kind of buying bits and bobs. And then we decided to get a booth in an antique center, actually, together. We weren't married, but we just thought it would be fun. And that's we were dabbling and we were cooking on the side. And then I remember we bought this really massive colonial house in Goshen, Connecticut. And Fritz said to me, I just really want to be a full-time antique dealer. So for a little while, I was still cooking and he was building our business. It really sprung from there. It really did. Fritz was very passionate and we had a couple of different shops, first in our house, and then we moved our shop down to Woodbury, Connecticut, where we were for over 20 years, right?
Yeah, 20
long
years,
time.
good 20 years.
And during that time, I was really busy raising our two daughters and I was sort of on the fringe involved in the business, and Fritz was absolutely full-time and built it into a wonderful, wonderful business. It was, full of all these kinds of early things that we love. It just was an amazing life. It was a lifestyle choice as much as a passion, and we were very lucky. We've always felt very lucky. So this is our sunroom, and it's actually my favorite room of the house. I just love the light in here at all times of day, and it's where we sit and have our tea in the morning, and later in the day we can sort of lounge out or take a nap on the couch. And also, it's a great place to have dinner parties because we have this enormous table, and it's a very open and sort of inviting space.
It's also a place to keep things, of course, knowing us. Right here we have a batch of things which are all basically classically inspired. There are some ancient things. This is an ancient Hellenistic period figurine, terracotta figurine, but wonderful drapery on it, but it is an ancient object. This is a 17th century marble carved statue. Diana with the crescent moon on her forehead is the emblem of Diana, the huntress. But it's wonderful. It's 17th or early 18th century. Probably Italian, and this is a plaster bust of Ariadne, but it's all classical themed here, various little bits and pieces. This is a bronze, an early 19th century Grand Tour bronze of Hercules. It's a very famous model, and this is a reduced copy of it. And this is another, I think this is a Diana as well, actually. Or maybe it's Aphrodite adjusting her sandal. Again, an early 19th century bronze. But they're evocative of the ancient Rome, which is wonderful.
So I wanted to introduce you to these portraits. These are our two daughters, Chloe and Phoebe. My grandmother, as I mentioned, was an antique dealer, but she also had an art gallery. And she was very keen on portraits. So as I was growing up, she had many commissions of portraits of our family. And one day we went to visit, the girls and I, and they were just of a certain age. And suddenly, Omi, my grandmother, said to me, "Oh my gosh, we have to have the girls painted now." And literally, she picked up the telephone and called a portrait artist that she knew in Woodstock, New York, because that's where she lived, and had the woman come over that very day. And the woman started taking some sort of scout photos of the girls out in the field and, kind of developed the concept and decided that it should be a little pre-Raphaelite feeling. And so over the next month or so, we went over several times for her to have the girls sit for these portraits. And they're actually two parts of a diptych. And my grandmother wanted to commission it this way so that for our lifetimes, we could have them together. But then going forward, the girls would each have their own portrait that were connected by the tree. It's just a lovely story, and they're beautiful portraits.
Another story, which I think is a wonderful serendipitous situation that happened in the making of the two portraits of our daughters, Chloe and Phoebe, is that they were posed in the attire that had been chosen for them, outdoors with the apple tree, for photographs from which the paintings would be done. But during the posing section, while the artist was taking photographs of them, what should happen but a deer wandered into the scene in the background to eat the apples. So both girls had to turn and look at the deer, creating this wonderful vignette photograph, which is a combination of both the poised and the candid, which I think is a wonderful mix of the two.
Earlier, Fritz was talking about how he was a painter when I first met him, and I thought it would be really interesting for you to see one of his works, which is right over here. So this is a painting that Fritz did in the not too distant past, but nevertheless he doesn't seem to paint anymore.
I paint occasionally, but not very often. I did this about 6 or 8 years ago, one winter when we had time, and I did some of these abstract Cubism-inspired paintings, and it fit really well in this room. Again, going back to what I said before earlier, using modern things is something we all should do. You fill your house with the things that have meaning for you. There are two other modern paintings here as well, and these are by a man named Richard Beauvais, who is no longer with us. He died, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, but we were brought in as antique dealers to look at the antiques in his house, and we ended up buying a batch of his art, and these two particular ones I loved, and we bought this one, which is actually a self-portrait, which goes with, it's titled here below, was obviously exhibited with a wonderful label from the 1950s, and its original frame, but it goes with my theme of all the other self-portraits in the front hall, although they are of much earlier painters. It's a wonderful theme, an artist painting an image of themselves. The other one up here is a still life by Richard Beauvais, and it has a plaque about how it won a prize. I guess it's on the reverse. I think it was at the National Academy. He's a wonderful painter, and he never had a gallery. An excellent painter, did beautiful paintings, but never had a gallery and didn't sell his works. He was a teacher, an art teacher at Pratt in New York City for his career.
So we have this amazing Italian lion. One year we took the girls and we went to Italy for a wonderful vacation, and we were in Florence. And because of our interest in faience and Italian pottery, we also went to a lot of the shops where they're making copies of early things. And we just kind of went crazy and fell in love with this guy. It was crazy because we had to ship it home. But we ended up buying a lot of things there, and we sold almost all of it, but we just could not part with him. And whenever I go by, I have to pet him, and sometimes I even tempt fate so he doesn't bite me. So the sunroom sort of seamlessly flows into this back hallway, and it's actually another opportunity for some of our collecting. You can see here on the wall all these portraits of all of us, and it's sort of our little rogues gallery, if you will. These are portraits of our daughters and Fritz and I when we first were married, and then there are some of my grandparents and one of me as a child, all of which were commissioned by various people for us, including a portrait of our old dog, Pippa, which Fritz commissioned for my birthday. And the artist was so taken by our dog that she painted 2 of them. So we have one at each of our houses.
Again, this room has been a wonderful place for showcasing items. This piece of furniture is something from my family, and this is something actually from my grandparents had this. When they were first married on their honeymoon, they went to Italy in about 1921, I think it was, right after World War I. And they bought a whole of this Italian furniture, which I grew up with some of it, including this piece. And actually there's a wonderful photograph in here somewhere of my grandmother with my mother in her arms with this piece of furniture in the side. And the photograph is clearly, I think it's from 1922. My mother was about a year old. But in any case, above it, we have this wonderful carved statue of an angel. And I think it's probably early 17th, possibly late 16th century, carved wooden. Sadly, somebody had it outside for a while, so the paint has disintegrated a great deal, but it has wonderful movement, and I'm sure it is the angel Gabriel, one half of an Annunciation scene. So the Virgin Mary would have been over here with the angel Gabriel announcing to the Virgin Mary that she was going to have the baby Jesus. Story we all know. This is a good collection of American stoneware, all of them with the ovoid shapes, which I love. And I have a collection of these. I've been collecting them for years and years and years. They have such beautiful shapes, all hand-thrown, all different, all handmade, American 1800 to 1840 period. So that's another group of things which we have been buying over the years. They're funny things. They're actually shepherd's crooks, but they are, I don't believe, actually meant to be used. Shepherds would use these things historically to pull a sheep into its flock when the sheep was somewhere that it would not harm the sheep, but yet corral it to the direction that the shepherd wanted it to go. I think this one is a theater prop. It's beautifully made, but it does not seem as though it was really made to be used. And the other one I'm not sure about. It is the same kind of motif, but we don't actually know. These both came from my wife's grandmother, I believe.
Yeah, so my grandmother also loved to put together collections of things. So she had these in her house together with a collection of walking sticks that were always hung on the wall, and they're just a graphically beautiful thing. These walking sticks are very typical kind of American, carved for hikers. Nowadays we have the sort of modified ski pole, but people used to actually, climb up the mountain, kind of with one of these, but they're just so beautifully made. They're so beautifully, kind of turned, and they have a beautiful patina, so they become kind of an art object, really.
And it's interesting to note that some of them, not all of them, have the emblem of the hotel that they were used at, because these were something where you would stay at the hotel and you would borrow these to walk up the mountain, and they would have the emblem. I think this one is Haynes Falls, it says on it.
Yeah. Anyway, all from my grandmother's house.
One thing about the floors in these rooms, which I think is interesting to point out, is that because this section of the house was actually a 1980s addition, the floors were what I think are a fairly boring, narrow oak board floor, which is very common and very sturdy, and a good flooring material, as oak wears very well, but it's a bit of a boring wood. So with the lightness in these rooms, I really wanted to do something a little bit more dramatic and interesting. So I devised painting check floors and demarcating demarcating the rooms with two different schemes. So in the smaller room, I did smaller squares, and this is kind of our back entry, so I didn't want it too formal. So I did the squares on a regular basis, conforming to the room, without a border and without any sort of complication of a diagonal. But as you go into the larger room, I wanted to demarcate it and have it be representative and fit well with the room. So I made the squares a larger size, which goes better with the room, gives a little bit more drama because it matches the scale of the room, and then put them on the diagonal, which just makes it more interesting and a little bit more formal and highly worked. And then did a border around the edge, which also gives it a little bit more formality. And yet using the same color scheme in both rooms, which binds them together visually without there being too much contrast. And speaking about floors, the contrast is very interesting because you go from these rooms, which are very light and airy, into the kitchen with its 18th century floor with the wonderful early boards here. These are oak here, there's a lot of patching over here, which we had done, which we used old lumber for. But these are the original ones here, with these wide oak boards, where you can see how the nails, with the iron over the years, has created these stains, because the iron oxidizes and blackens the wood around it.
Welcome to the kitchen. This is the breezy knoll, I call it. This is where I spend a huge amount of my life with great pleasure cooking. This is another room that was created out of what were probably 2 or 3 rooms in the original colonial house. The walls were already gone again when we bought the house, and so we kind of embraced the idea that we had to make it into separate spaces. So the business end of the kitchen is down here, and we love a C shape. Because when you're a cook that enjoys the process of cooking, you really like that sort of pivot and go, and the workspace works really well that way. It's also really nice because when we have company or family here, everybody can be down at that end, they're not underfoot, and yet I can talk to everybody because everybody loves to be in the kitchen. And so this kind of an arrangement really functions very well. In making the plan for how this room would work, originally this was a solid wall, and the walls were actually barn board, so the whole room was so dark and dingy. And Fritz had the brilliant idea of getting an old window and actually putting it in this wall to just let in this incredible western light. And it changed the entire room. I mean, it just opened it up. Now we have sunshine pouring in, especially in the late afternoon when the sun sets right through the far windows. So it just completely transformed the kitchen. So another one of the things that I love in the kitchen is our collection of Delftware. You can see all of these big, what we call chargers, because they're larger sized rather than plates. And then we have an exceptional collection of Delft tiles. So there are some Delft and some other tiles here, but if you pan around the sink, most of these are 18th century Delft tiles from Holland. We have an enormous collection of Delftware and faience scattered throughout the house. But when we were young collectors and we didn't have a lot of money, we were passionate about Delft, but we couldn't afford the big, beautiful pieces, but we could afford the tiles. So as a result, we have, I don't know, what would you say?
Oh, there are a couple hundred.
Couple hundred tiles. We picked sort of some of the best to display, and the rest are in a box in the attic. That's kind of our MO. But anyway, we do enjoy them, and they just lend such richness. Each one is a little vignette, a little story. Sometimes they're religious stories, sometimes they're secular, sometimes they're, you know, a shepherdess with her boobs hanging out. I mean, it's just sort of amazing, the variety of storylines that you find.
One of the things that I really had an idea of when we did the renovations here on the house was to really tie the spaces together and really make the spaces work very well, because none of this had been thought through in the prior renovations of this house. So I picked this big wide cornice molding to run down the whole section of this room and run around. We put the hood in here, but to run around the hood, run around the corner posts, which you see there, and around the corner boards, to tie everything together. So you go from the working part of the kitchen into the dining section, also the section where Dana has her desk, and it ties things together. And then unifying it also with the one color, I think, works very well, and having it be one room and yet 2 different spaces that still work together but do not isolate each one too much. Moving on from that into the corner cupboards, which were here, although we changed them minorly in order to have them run all the way up to the ceiling, because they only went as high as the windows. My sense is to make the ceiling go up, make the cupboards go up all the way. It brings your eye upward. And then we, of course, filled it with stuff, which is our modus operandi. We have collected all this wonderful stuff over the years from various locations. This is some of our early European faience. There is one Chinese porcelain vase in the top, which actually is from Dana's family. And then this very charming collection of face pictures here from various places. One French, one Persian one, and both of these are English actually, early creamware, but the faces are really kind of wonderful caricatures and silly in some sense, but evocative as a collection. Beautiful still life painting there of peaches on a wonderful early Chinese plate, and more of our good collection of Delft. A lot of it is broken or repaired, which never bothers me. It's just as old and has been loved and cared for that has been repaired. And I never think of that as being something that is detrimental. We have modern painting in here. I bought a batch, I think it was about 6 or 7 paintings by this one artist whose name escapes me now. And they were all really good. We sold all of them, but decided to keep this one because the green and the red just went so well in this room. Another example of how you just bring modern things in, the things that you love and want to live with, into your decorating. They can all work if you put the time in and the thought to make them work. Everybody is so different. It's so difficult to know. I think if someone said it's so eminently livable, I would find that a very high compliment. I find it eminently livable. It's a place that I'm excited to live in, excited to be in, and when we are away, for instance, if traveling, as we do travel quite a lot with our business, and we spend summers, we have a summer cottage we spend summers at, when you're away and you return and you find yourself so happy to be here and your eyes delighted to wander from one beautiful thing to another, you find it eminently livable, as everyone's home space should be. So if someone were to say, oh, I find your house to be so wonderful to live in, I would say that would be the greatest compliment.
So this is my desk. It's a wonderful object. It's an early desk with later kind of blue marbleized paint, and it just makes me smile, as does the collection of things that I have on top of it. One of the things that's quite amusing, when I was a little girl and all through my growing up, my mother would say if I was going somewhere, walk on eggs. Walk as though you're walking on eggs. And that kind of evolved into, bye darling, eggs! And as a result, eggs have huge significance in our family, and it's kind of carried on. My mother had one of these wonderful Italian egg stacks. They're really kind of wonderfully decorative. And so I inherited this from her, and it was sort of the beginning of the egg collection fetish all through our lives. Whenever we came up with something that was egg related, it would be a gift. And so we've managed to amass all of these. But I also have a little bit of a fetish with animals and birds. So I have added in all those things. And I really love the contrast of all these early things with modern art again. This is a painting that was actually done by my father, who was an artist and art teacher and an archaeologist. And I love bringing all those colors together. I love the juxtaposition between that and the early still life paintings. That is the thing. It's all about the mix. It's about balance. It's about color. It's about how your eye responds and what really draws joy for you. I mean, for me, looking at all of these things and even looking at them together, it just fills my eye, and it gives me such pleasure. It really makes me happy.
One thing that I've always loved, and Dana as well, are still life paintings. And of course, in a kitchen, they go so well because they almost always have food-related themes. These are several that we've come up with over the years. I was so pleased as Punch to find this pair of these. I think they're Spanish still lifes on one occasion, and we quickly acquired them. I think I gave them to Dana as a present. But this one with the fish, the radishes, the cabbage, all these things with a basket. And the eggs and these roses, it's just a wonderful thing, and they have their original frames. This is another one that came locally. This came from an old friend, antique dealer. It was without a frame. We put the frame on it. But the fried eggs, we've always both
all
thought
about the eggs.
silly and charming, and with a little bird on it, which is the European goldfinch. It's probably an Italian painting, and actually it must be because it's got the Chianti bottle with the telltale wicker straw work around the wine bottle there. And this is another one with the fish, which is a mate to this one over here, the Spanish still lifes, with these wonderful, you have cutlery, pieces of fruit, and again the roses, and this really interesting basket here, beautifully done, and a copper pan. They're just charming things, but they go so well in a kitchen, a still life. It's so appropriate to what goes on in a kitchen. So it's a pleasure to have them in this room.
So now we're going to head upstairs. Come on up. So here we are in the primary bedroom, Fritz and my bedroom, which is ensuite with this lovely bathroom. I just have to say something about the color of the trim and the main color in the bathroom, because I love this color so much. It's actually, boringly enough, called light blue, but it has the capacity to change with the light. It's almost like water sometimes, and especially in the bathroom when the sun pours in. I've never had a color that moved me quite so much as this shade of blue. I don't know why. It's just very magical to me.
And it is a Faro and Ball paint.
Yeah, again, this was part of our experiment to use a different brand of paint. I'm not trying to plug them, but nevertheless, it's interesting for people who are interested in their homes. Anyway, here we are, again, just crammed full of everything that we love. I have a kind of particular interest in needleworks, and the tapestry, of course, falls into that category, but also things like these little pieces of crewel work, which are so beautifully done. And what's astonishing about them is, with their age, the color is still so brilliant. And then I have another little needlework over here, and then we have these wonderful portraits. I particularly love this one, and I've never wanted to sell it because it actually looks so much like Fritz did when I first met him. So I always think of it, and he's an artist. He's holding a pencil and he's looking out at the viewer. It's almost as though it may have been a self-portrait. In any case, to me, it's Fritz as a young man. So this four-poster bed is something that we've been dragging around for years, and it's had a lot of different iterations in different houses because we are serial house buyers. We always think of houses as just big antiques, and so collect them all. So we've had lots of houses, and over the years, mainly this has been our bed. And sometimes we have it, you know, draped with amazing tulle, and it looks very dreamy in the summertime. And then in the dark of winter, sometimes we have navy velvet drapes hanging off of it. But being that it's the shoulder season, it's a little naked. But we do have the counterpane at the top, which is literally nothing more than a big chunk of really, really beautiful new fabric that had such a bold pattern. I love the use of pattern on pattern. I love mixing those things, and yet the thing that unifies it is that it's all blue and white in this case. It's sort of a conceit in a way to do all blue and white, but at the same time, you know, it's classic for a reason. So I love the mix of all these things, and it just makes a beautiful bed, but it also creates a kind of acoustic in the room because the fabrics, they kind of absorb sound, and so you walk from the hallway into the bedroom and the sound almost envelops you, or the lack of sound, and it has a softness which makes the bedroom kind of a refuge.
And the bed itself is something that actually we had altered because we love the barley twist, which is a real 17th century form, and you don't find these very often. And when we bought this bed, it was actually a single bed and yellow. And so I had our restorer alter it, and it did not have the posts up here, it had finials up here. So we had our restorer make the rails, enlarge the width of the bed, but keeping basically the posts, which was the important part. And then with the superstructure here, from which we suspended these wonderful blue velvet drapes with this wonderful gilt trim, which we have, although we haven't used it lately. And then we got these finials. These are actually wonderful 19th century English high backs, which I had him cut down and use as finials for the bed. So they actually have the wonderful early gilt finish that you get from this kind of a thing on what is basically a made-up bed. But the effect is wonderful, and it's about the effect. And so that's how that came up. And we have other things in this room of great note, one of which is a lovely little painting of the Madonna and Child here. French or Belgian, Netherlandish, the Low Countries up there, but a just charming painting of the Madonna and Child in early 1600s with a little view out the window there, but a beautiful painting in a period frame as well. And a very large Chinese porcelain painted vase. This size is very hard to find. It's a pleasure to find. And it's very traditional to put them in your fireplaces in the winter, because your fireplaces, of course, in the summer, are pretty dull places in the summer when you don't have a fire going. This is a really wonderful, interesting chest. Latin American, beautifully decorated drawer fronts, and it would originally have been high up on a base with a full front. And that front has long gone, and they made another base for it at some point. But the beautifully decorated drawer fronts are what remain, as well as its wonderful ironwork. You can see here the little rings that would have had been the attachments for the hooks that would have held the full front. So it would have been a desk that came down upon which you could write and pull your writing implements out from the drawers.
More importantly, though, Fritz actually bought this at auction, and as so often happens when he comes home with something fabulous, I immediately absconded with it and said, nope, that's not going in the shop, that's coming to our house, that's going to be my chest of drawers. I operate mostly from the gut, and he obviously is the academic around here, but I just fell completely in love with it. It's such a special piece.
I knew she would. I knew when I saw it where it was going.
Destiny. Fritz and I mostly agree about things. Our taste is very closely aligned. I think we're very lucky because not only do we live together for these many years, but we work together daily. But there definitely are times when we don't see eye to eye. I think my taste may run a little bit more rustic and a little bit more eclectic than his does. He tends to have a more scholarly approach and love things not only because they're beautiful, but because of what they are specifically. What's the history? What's this? What's that? So sometimes his academic interest is more powerful than my gut reaction. And sometimes he'll say, oh, this is an amazing XYZ, and it's from here and it's from there. And I just turn and I look at him and I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to live with that. We don't always agree, but by and large we do. It's kind of a miracle. It really is. We love a lot of the same things, and we love a density of decoration, which it could be said that not everybody likes, though at their peril. Anyway, we really enjoy kind of the amassing of a collection, as we talked about before. And we each have sort of specialty things that draw us. Fritz has, old master paintings and drawings are something that he's always loved and been very passionate about. And I love certain ones in a less specific way. I love them because of a facial expression, or like this Madonna and Child behind us here. I love this one because, it's just so soft, and it is so evocative of maternity and of babies. And, I'm not going to stand here and tell you exactly what it is and why I love it. I love it just because it's a beautiful piece of art. And Fritz loves it because it's beautiful, but he also loves things because of what they are and what they tell us about the past. So we collect for different reasons, and we get enthusiastic about different things, but we somehow always manage to meet in the middle. We're very lucky.
Generally is a situation where we both may really admire and be happy to buy something, but whether it ends up in the house is another matter. And a lot of it is there a place for it? Is there a room in which it will go?
Is there a square inch of wall left? Or do we have to trade up or down?
And that can always be a consideration, because if you don't have room for it, if you don't have a spot for it, as much as you love it, it's not always easy to keep it.
And that's the pragmatic side of him that I sometimes have to argue with, because when I fall in love with something, I'll be damned if I'm going to sell it.
A couple things here, just going around the room, because we love these things. There's this wonderful part of a tapestry. It would have been a much larger tapestry, and I don't know what the subject would have been, but there's this dog, this large dog with all this character being embraced by this child, and the look of the two of them, I just think it's absolutely splendid. And again, it has the wonderful tones of early needlework, which you don't get in anything else. The richness, the depth of the tones. Here we have a painting of a woman holding a book. She has a trumpet in her hand, and the book is open, and a scarf on her head with stars. And it's a personification of fame, which is something that they did in the Renaissance and in the 17th century. They would take the attributes of a certain theme, an idea, and make an image that would be a human figure that exemplifies these. So this would be a figure of fame, and she has the trumpet because the trumpet announces the coming of a splendid personage, a famous person. The book, because the famous person is written about. History is written about a person, so she has the book. And the stars in her hair, because a famous person is in the heavens and has a celestial part of their character. An Italian in the 1600s, this painting is. Some of the many things that we have and love.
So we're going to take you down and give you a little tour of this wonderful potting shed that Fritz designed this past summer. Unfortunately, of course, it's the fall now, and the beautiful flower beds that led up to it are kind of crispy, but nevertheless, it's worth a peek. Fritz?
Come have a look. It's just a little building, but it's just what I thought should be here in the garden. It's a place to keep the garden tools, a place to keep your seeds, and yet it also is a place where you can sit, you can read a book, you can do whatever you want. You could write a book in this little space. There are two entrances. We used old doors and old windows. So you have two entrances. You can come in either way, either in the walled garden or out to the yard. And there are wonderful views out to the side here. So to sit in here and enjoy the view is just a splendid thing. You ask what home means to me. Well, that's a hard question, but I have to say home is where you're comfortable, where you live, where you want to be, where you cook your meals, where you invite friends over and enjoy an evening together, where you wake up in the morning and have your morning tea, or step outside and have your morning tea if the weather is fine. Home is where you're comfortable, where you want to be. That's what it means to me.
And for me, home is a place that I draw strength and inspiration. It's the place that I come back to after I've spent all of the fuel I have, and I have the opportunity to look around me and to remember all the things that we've done together and all the things we've collected and all the memories that have passed through the home. And those things are what refuel me. All of the beauty, all of the sort of history that goes into wherever you live. So that, to me, is what home is. Home is where you've built your life, and it's the place that you recharge and get yourself going again.
It's been wonderful to have you. We have a long day ahead.
Lots of antiques to buy.
We have busy lives.
Yes.
I'm sure you do as well. And it's been a pleasure to have you here, Homeworthy.
Thanks for coming. See you again.
Hey Homeworthy, I'm Corinne. Welcome to my home in West Palm Beach. I'd love to show you around.
You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hi there, my name is Corinne Belock. I'm the owner of Palm Beach Regency, a vintage furniture business here in West Palm Beach. So we are sitting in the entryway of our home here in El Cid in West Palm Beach. El Cid is a historic neighborhood very close to downtown West Palm Beach, and we live in a 1920s style Mediterranean home. It's very well known throughout the neighborhood that the homes were built in the 1920s, and many of them are in this style. The thing that's really fun about our home is it's historically marked as 1924, but actually we did a little research with the city and the first structure was built here in 1905, so there's a possibility it's one of the oldest houses in El Cid. So I can tell you a little bit about how we stumbled across this house. A very dear friend of mine lived 2 doors down. We're on Dyer Road, and I was at a tennis lesson and I get a text when I get out and she's like, "There's a home for sale on my street." I immediately left the tennis lesson and drove by and saw that there was an open house sign up, which I thought was perfect. So I walk right into the open house, and funny enough, it was an open house for realtors because this is the first home we've ever purchased. So I had no idea how it worked. But I immediately walked in and could see the flow of the place, could see how we could make it our own. And so it was a really exciting find that day, to be sure. My immediate reaction was, oh my gosh, there's so much light and so many windows. So my biggest fear about having an old home is that the windows would have to be redone completely. But we got so lucky that the windows are all original to the home, and in fact had even better hurricane glass already put in. So the light was a big draw for me. And then the other thing, which isn't a draw for everyone, but is a major draw for my husband and I, is that they're really well-defined rooms. So our home isn't open concept. It creates cozy nooks for spaces, which I guess I've always been drawn to. So those were the 2 things that really intrigued me about the home. My husband and I own Palm Beach Regency, which is a vintage furniture business down here in West Palm Beach. And we purchased the business 3 years ago. So prior to that, we had lived in a rental on Palm Beach Island and then purchased this as our first home. So in furnishing our rental and then this house, I shopped at Palm Beach Regency all the time and really fell in love with the rattan and the islandy style of that decor. And so that really started to inform how I wanted my forever home to be. So Palm Beach Regency had a big play in that, and then now as owners, it's pretty fascinating because when I find something I love, it's really hard because I do need to sell it, but at the same time, I try to bring home a treasure like once or twice a year that's really gonna be a forever piece in my home. So we are in the entry living room of our home at 320 Dyer, and the thing that's interesting about Florida entryways is that you really come right off the door into the space. So there's no coat rack, there's no place for storage. This is just where you come right in. So decorating it was actually kind of a challenge. This room is really, to me, has some of the most vintage throughout the home, from the storage piece where I keep our party gear. This is like all the July 4th stuff, birthday stuff, all that weird stuff you collect, to the central table. That's a really fun rattan piece from Palm Beach Regency. I'm not a particularly clutter heavy person, but when I find something I love, it always has a home. So this is the OCD part where the pink bird faces the doorway at all times. I know, I'm a weirdo, so this is an adorable bird. Surprisingly, he's not vintage. He's from another local dealer that does imports down here in Florida, but I just fell in love with it. I am overly sensitive to the fact that I can't have this home be all pink and green because I would if I could, but my husband lives here too. So within every space, I try to incorporate something that he loves or something that I know is like within his comfort zone. So obviously, Bruce Springsteen, books, and he's a big reader, as am I. So our home is sprinkled with books, which you'll see throughout, but a lot of these are really meaningful to him or to the both of us. And then I'd like to share that this is a faux orchid from Palm Bungalow in West Palm. You would never know. I am busy, so I have no shame. It's the best fake that I could find. It's incredible. I probably struggled with the layout in this room more than anything because I'm all about like usefulness within a room, and sometimes this room is just meant to be pretty. So we have a bit of a seating area over here, which also is heavily featured with Palm Beach Regency vintage pieces. If I have a girlfriend over, maybe we'll have a cocktail here, especially in the summer in Florida when it can be super duper hot. It's sometimes nice to be able to like have a cocktail inside. I know that sounds crazy, but it is so hot. This little jail cell that we have created here, no, just kidding, this is super old. I have no idea who or what this is about, but we had to keep it because weird details, I'm all about it. When I grew up, we had a willow tree in our yard. And so when I found this on Stray Dog Designs, I absolutely fell in love. The green was the perfect shade of green, and it was called the willow tree chandelier or something like that. So it just really evoked so many like happy childhood memories. I love this piece, and it just sets the tone for the entire room. This is what I would call the COVID chaise. So during COVID, I was lounging quite a bit because I couldn't work and I had a lot of free time. So this got a lot of use during that time. I hope one day again to be lounging here as much as possible. So I did a collection of course, pink and green because that's the overall sort of color theme for this room, but it was truly inspired by this textile that I found in Chichicastenango in Guatemala that I literally got chased down the street for because I love like crazy shopping experiences, but it really set the tone. And so I tried to pull some of these colors. You know, some of these are like Suriname lily pillows. This one's from Mexico. This one was God knows where, how old it is. And you know, I really ground everything. You know, my textiles and my budget are somewhat, you know, normal. So I use a Sunbrella fabric sometimes just to like make it all come together, and you'll see a lot of stripes throughout the house. So that's kind of where that comes from. I love traveling in Guatemala. It's an incredible place, one of my favorite cities. I'm hoping to go back there in September. But my girlfriend and I went out to Chichicastenango, which is this incredible market in, it's not in a major city. It's kind of like a 3-hour drive from a major city in Guatemala. And we immediately get out and we're just going nuts. I mean, the textiles, the colors, the everything. Well, me being sort of responsible, I saw this piece and was passing on it. Not because I wasn't gonna come back, but literally I was just like, well, we just got here. Like, is it the first thing I buy? You know, I just was, sometimes I get a little cautious on that. But this woman was convinced that this was for me and literally followed us throughout the market. So after like 10 minutes of her following us, and she was being adorable and sweet, and we were laughing through the whole thing. But the funny thing is, literally 10 minutes is all it took. I was like, give it to me, it's mine. And literally, it's one of my favorite things in my home, along with some other pillows that she chased me down for. But those are the kind of adventures that I love to have, and they always create the best pieces, you know, in your home. I would say that the biggest inspiration for me over the last 15 years has definitely been travel. We started traveling when we lived in New York City to the Caribbean, and that was an immediate sort of, you know, let's just get out of the city, let's get somewhere warm and beautiful. But I was really fortunate over the last 10 years to travel quite extensively, you know, through Morocco, Europe, and also through Central and South America. And Mexico as well. So those places have really informed a lot of my inspiration into my own home. Everything from the colors and textiles to collecting individual like handmade pieces that's all a huge part of the stuff I love in homes, things that you can't find anywhere else. And so it's really interesting now to do that with actual vintage found in South Florida, because I have a love for things that are just unique and one of a kind. So when I find it, I want other people to have that in their homes as well, just to give every home like a sense of it's not like anyone else's. You would never see this anywhere else. That's always my goal when I'm trying to like decide how to, finish off a room. So now I want to take you into the office in the house. Prior to us buying Palm Beach Regency, this was actually my office. I used it when I had a home organization business. So the decor color scheme was just a little bit different. So now that I spend all my time working at Palm Beach Regency in the warehouse or the showroom, I transitioned it to my husband's office. So I made the colors just a smidge more masculine. I went with blues because they work well with the other colors we have in the home. So nothing too wild or crazy, but I love this space. The first most remarkable thing about it, maybe one of the things that drew me to the home, were the original Cuban tile floors. So we didn't touch these guys. We left all the original spots and patina and everything that makes it charming. I don't even know the last time they've been swept, to be honest. So it's really natural in here. Otherwise, really just went with something that would keep the light in the room. So I didn't want to focus on anything covering the windows. We're really okay if you want to peek in my home and see me working at my desk. Go ahead, it's really fascinating. So we kept the light flowing into this space really well. As a former organizer, I am a bit about like a clean desk policy, I know. So the glass desk, I think was from Wisteria. It's super heavy, but it is the kind of piece that lets the floor shine. And then obviously storage, not that that's sexy, but I mean, you gotta have practical storage in an office. So this is a photo of two little babies, actually. My husband and I, this is, I think, we met in 2004 and we got married in 2010. And this photo is, I think, from like 2005. So it was one of the original, like your best friend's wedding photos. And I love it. And it reminds me of how young I used to look. And he used to look. And so we've been married since 2010, and he works with me full time in the business. He does some consulting stuff, but he primarily works with me in the business, and it's amazing. I mean, it's hard, but it's amazing. One thing you'll see in this office is the first of many, which is I travel to Morocco and I can't not buy poofs. Somebody can tell me that poofs are like overdone. I still keep finding a way to work them into every room in my home. And so this is what I would call like the masculine poof for my husband's office. So that was like a good compromise. So that's a fun detail there. And then the other thing I love in this room is this chair, which we got when we moved for the first time out of New York City. It was our first like big purchase. I mean, I think it's from, again, I think it was Wisteria that made it, but it's just a beautiful modernist style chair that, like, who knew it would work so perfectly in Florida all these years later and sort of become a piece that I'm just so fond of and reminds me of those like first purchases for sure. In those travels to Chichicastenango, one of the things they do in that portion of Guatemala, in areas of Guatemala, are these amazing bird embroidery pieces. So this piece was originally in my office as well. I fell in love with like the black and white split on the textile. And then funny enough, when we transitioned this to be DJ's office, it just perfectly worked. So, other than switching out like a pillow here or, some storage bins, it just like the space all tied together so easily. When we started furnishing this home and any, our homes that are rental on the island and everything else, I will find rattan wherever I can find it. This is a Serena Lily light fixture. We actually even had this in our first house the time we moved out of New York City many, many years ago. And so it has been now through 3 homes with us. And I just love it. The simple arch of it really mimics the arches that are shown kind of throughout the house. And it doesn't distract, again, from the most important piece in the house, which is the Cuban tile floors in this space. So now we're gonna walk into our dining room, which is just off the office. This is probably the most commented on piece in our home, which is the ping pong dining room table. I saw this in coastal living before we even bought the house, and a designer out of the Panhandle of Florida had done it for a custom piece for a coastal living home. Her name is Erica Powell. And I was obsessed with it and had no idea if we even had a dining room that it would ever fit it, but it was like the first thing that I needed to get as soon as we found a home. Luckily enough, I got it. I secured it. I fell in love with the seafoam color. I picked the chartreuse color base, which I'm still obsessed with generally as a color. And it is amazing. The thing I love about it is it seats 8. So when we're ready to entertain, we literally just pull up these vintage Brighton chairs to the ends. We got our paddles here. We pull up these to the ends of the table. It seats 8, and when we're not using it, I use it as a display for like a beautiful page of an open book, for example. This poolside with slim airings just always gets me in a vintage mood, but I just walk past and find a new page, and this one's speaking to me today. My friend is a florist. I don't always have these beautiful flowers here, I would like to say. Maybe I'll have like an orchid from the grocery store, but today I've got these beautiful blooms that she made for me when she was in town. This is an adorable little pineapple, like, I don't know, cookie jar or something. That's what we keep the ping pong balls in. And then, of course, our paddles are on a Shelligans dish, which could also be put here. I might need to invest in some different paddles because the last time my husband and his buddy were playing, there was a bit more scraping than I'm comfortable with, and some little blue lines were left on the table. So, you know, I would say this. It's for some light ping pong. We're not looking to scratch anybody's dining table. I love it too much, but it is a fun place to gather, a fun place to have dinner, and it's absolutely a conversation starter. So that's probably the extent of the ping pong that gets played. Another shell, I feel like the blush color on it, the yellowing matte, I just fell in love with this piece. I bought it at a local secondhand store well before I owned Palm Beach Regency. And I just love the scale of it. It brings me joy. It's airy, it's light. So that's my, you know, definitely set the tone after the dining table for this space. I would describe my style as fairly laid back. We are lovers of the Caribbean, lovers of the islands. So I think I drew a lot of inspiration from that over the years. So I would say laid back, a little bit coastal, but a little on the island side of coastal. And I think, you know, the other thing is it's pretty clean. I like spaces not too overly cluttered. So that's how I would probably describe it. I'd love to show you my butler's pantry and my kitchen, so follow me. So this is obviously an original detail to the home. We didn't want to touch it at all, to be honest. I fell in love with the old hardware on the house. On the butler pantry doors. I fell in love with it. The old tingy glass. And, you know, the only thing that I would say updated it is that I really tried to go with a theme in the color. So if you look up, we had the first of many, not the first, the third of many, many stripes throughout the home, and a simple sort of modern, you know, leather chandelier, right? Or light fixture. So that blue tone really set the theme for me. And funny enough, over the years, I had collected blues and tones of blues in glassware and things. Really simple, nothing fancy. A lot of it collected through travels in Marrakesh and other countries, bowls and dishes and all that stuff. So I would say that's what really set the tone in here. This vintage glassware just like sums up the color perfectly. It's like the color of the ocean. And so that's kind of what we wanted to go for in here. We kept the original to purchase mahogany countertops in here. You'll see in the kitchen we have very little storage, but like I have got all the storage I need down here for pots and pans and everything. So, you know, the kitchen footprint is small, but with the butler's pantry, it's more than enough for our family to sort of use and love. The other thing I would point out, because this is a little nod to my husband, so this is the Ode to Cleveland. My husband grew up in Cleveland. His mother had originally given him this poster, In Motion for the Millennium, in 1999, so now you know how old we are. And I found this original photography about Cleveland, and I just like to bring his personality into this space as much as possible. So moving from my little nook into our kitchen. So the kitchen was kind of interesting. When we purchased it, I didn't love what was going on here, but I also knew that I didn't have much budget to change any footprint of it. So I was like, how do we make this work? So the main thing is we kept the original mahogany countertops. So to me, in this kitchen, I feel like I am in a Caribbean home kitchen, right? So it's got mahogany countertops, crisp white walls, things that speak to like a Caribbean vibe to me. And so I really embrace that in the color theme as well. So I went with yellow and green, which is like always one of my favorite color combinations. So I'm shocked. I, of course, found a way to work that into the home overall. A friend of mine who's a local potter, her business is called Avenue Pottery. She hand did the tile, the mermaid tile behind the stove. So that backsplash is such a really special detail for us. And then I love things like pineapple baskets, of which I will pick up on all of my travels. So one of my favorite things about this kitchen is also the nooks. So there's another nook here, which is our bar. So before we were able to renovate the guest house, we definitely needed somewhere to gather with friends and pour drinks and have fun. So this was it, and we had to keep it because honestly, again, the summer heat can be intense, so a bar inside's not the worst thing. Some of my favorite things here are the art, to be honest. Meaningful photographs. This is the location where we were married in Anguilla in the British West Indies. And then this was the actual, a friend of mine had our wedding location sketched. And you'll see the differences, but this was pre-hurricane and it was renovated for the post-hurricane. We honeymooned in Mystique, so that's a wonderful Slim Aarons photo from Mystique, which always makes nice memories. My husband's Irish, so we have this Irish man here. And, you know, overall collected and loved, and vintage bar books, all that stuff is such a fun thing to collect and find. So I guess I do have a collection issue now that I think about it. So I don't have like one set collection. I feel like I sell things when I find them, so that's a little bit tough for me to say, but I will say this. If you count the number of chairs in this home, you will be shocked. It is so many for 2 people who live here. That's a pretty ridiculous thing. And then I would say I'm also drawn to lamps. I could buy lamps and switch out lamps all day long in this home. The only thing stopping me is that our lamps sell really fast, so I don't even get a chance to bring them home. For me, the old vintage, unique pieces give a home soul. They create a story, they remind you of experiences in travel, they remind you of your wedding day or whenever your children were born or whatever it is. And so I think the collections are the most special thing about a home. So before we head upstairs, you have to see this amazing shell mirror that I had made. So a gal that worked for me that does a ton of custom shell mirrors had this made specifically for me. Of course I said, go pink. I'll always love pink, I just know that. And this version of it is a little bit wild and crazy. I wanted it to feel like almost like organically put together, not too pretty, not too perfect, kind of just like the home. I like it to be a little bit fun and funky. Welcome to our primary bathroom upstairs. So this is probably the other space that made me fall in love with the home. It's the original Florida porch off the house. So at one point this was a fully open structure, and prior to us moving here, someone had renovated it very smartly into the primary bathroom off the master bedroom. I fell in love with this. The original Pecky ceilings are just stunning. You know, these have barely been wiped of cobwebs. I mean, we keep it really natural in here and I love it. It has this like island Caribbean, like I come home every day from Palm Beach Regency and my feet are aching and I'm exhausted, and I hop into this tub. And we got incredibly lucky on the master bathroom that we didn't have to do extreme stuff, right? So the tub was actually here and the shower was here, and the tile works for me. Maybe it wouldn't have been like my first choice in the entire world, but budget-wise and color-wise, it reminds me of sand, which sort of went with the overall vibe I was hoping for. And so we ended up keeping it, and the layout was perfect. We actually did redo both the his and hers vanities and had custom vanities made and put in. And so that was the biggest upgrade, as well as hardware, mirror, sinks, faucets, all that stuff, just to give it a more modernized look and feel and to keep it light and airy, just like we were hoping this bathroom would feel. So now I'd love to show you the guest bedroom upstairs. Follow me. So welcome to the guest bedroom in the main house. This is where, when you come visit me, you can stay. This is a really interesting space. To be completely honest, it really was at first a mishmash of all the pieces after we decorated that I didn't quite know where to put, but somehow it just like tied all together. Starting with the light fixture in this room, this was one of the first pieces, and it's not vintage, to be completely honest. I think it's PB teen, something crazy, right? But this was before I was able to find vintage versions of this, and I collected it, and it's a precious palm leaf. The scale of it's always good for an old home because it's not too big. That's sometimes hard to find in tall chandeliers. So I love that guy, so fun. And then my other favorite thing, it reminds me of a tennis club, like you just walked into a tennis club and you want to put on tennis whites and play. Again, the only thing that has touched this chair in the last 60 years is probably my Clorox wipes, because I did not change a thing about the upholstery. I kept all the original vinyl on it, and I just love it. Even like the little details. The piping in green, it's just perfect. So that guy also had to come home with me immediately when it walked in the store. I collected this Italian rattan bench in one of my early purchases at Palm Beach Regency. And as much as I love it, I knew in the primary bedroom, I wanted to go a little more old Hollywood kind of glam. So I was like, how do I work this in somewhere? It's perfect here. And I love this at the footboard. This is another key Palm Beach Regency find. We sell these like all day long, and these are the faux bamboo Thomas. I feel like I'm on a commercial for my store. I'm not. But I love this piece. It's such a great classic faux bamboo Thomasville chest. The golden color is what sold me on it for the space. When I'm doing a room, shockingly enough, I like white linen bedding. And I don't know if it's because I know I want to have fun with pillows and headboards and other fabrics that I bring in and other textiles. Like this was the sister to my Chichi Castanego find downstairs. And this has always been on the foot of every guest room we've had. And it just sets the color tone for every space. Again, the amazing little fun, somebody would have walked right past it, but I fell in love with it, rug from, I believe this one was from somewhere in Mexico. I'm blanking all of a sudden. But anyways, the colors were perfect. I used the guest bedroom to put pieces that otherwise like just didn't fit somewhere. So this is a wonderful example, is like, you know, old photographs in frames that still have like sentimental value, but things that are orange didn't quite fit anywhere else, but when I tied it with the Marrakesh flare, it somehow works along with blue. So it's just a room and a space for me to fully experiment with color, whereas in some of the other spaces I try to like rein myself in. It's pretty hard, but I do try. So when we purchased the house, we didn't have to touch the main home. The structures was all intact. We didn't have to take out any walls or do any major work. And I love that about the main house. But the really fun part has been that we did have a full demo of the backyard guest house. And we really created a space that just works so perfectly for my husband and I. So we basically created an outdoor loggia bar, and we spend a lot of time out there with friends. We live in South Florida, so our friends from across the country visit all the time, and we spend, almost 90% of our time out there hanging out and having fun and enjoying some cocktails. And so I would say that is definitely the thing that's most special and certainly unique to this home. Welcome to the guest house. This was a structure that really was a full gut renovation. So we're in a historic home, so we couldn't change the footprint of the size of the guest house, but we had that space to work with. So we essentially had to demo it down to the studs. They even poured new concrete because we were having some water drainage issues. So this really is a truly new structure for us that we created. And so the yellow and white Ballard couch pulls out to a queen bed, so we can sleep multiple sets of friends here at the same time, which is really fun. So we love to entertain and have friends in from out of town for that. And then moving into this, we use it in the summer quite a bit as well. When it's too hot to sit outside, just grab a drink at the bar and come in here. So that's what we sort of love to do. I would say that one of the most unique things, it's probably not for everyone, but it's definitely for me and my husband, is the photography on the walls in the guest house. So I knew that I wanted to go a little more crisp and clean, not too overly collected in this space. I wanted it to feel very much the style of our home, but also a little bit like it was a little vacation for someone, right? So a little bit of like a little hotel vibe, a funky hotel vibe. So we picked a really clear color theme, yellow. Green here is a neutral for us in this house. So yellow is the big color statement, but I knew I wanted black and white photography. So this is Steven Spielberg in the mouth of Jaws, which is bizarre, but I love. Jaws is one of my favorite movies. To me, it says summer. So when I have friends come from the north to stay, hopefully they see Jaws and they just think about their best summer memory that they've ever had. So that's sort of the tie-in. And then there's a piece of work, photography in the guest bathroom as well, that ties the two together. That's really fun. We decided to make one corner of the room into a banquette, and we have storage underneath these seats. So it's amazing. Again, the stripes throughout, and this space in particular has a ton of PBR finds, mainly because when we were building it, we had already become owners of Palm Beach Regency. So I was like, we can't buy anything, must come from the store. So everything from the big round oyster shell mirror on the wall to the Saarinen table, which I was lucky enough to find and went immediately in my car because I knew I had a spot for it, to the side tables, the chairs, the screen, which we use here for privacy when we have guests. I was nervous about the space being too dark, but our trick to it was to make this a window. It had to actually be a window because of our historical regulations. It had to be a garage door front, actually. So we did a little trick where we built a garage door front for inspection. Okay, now I'm telling all the sins. And we put the mirror behind it, the window behind it. So after inspection, we just had to take down the front, and we had this mirror right here. So for privacy when guests stay, we just pull the screen across, and it's like the best thing. So when I picked the color theme of yellow, it was like vintage Smeg fridge is a must. So luckily they make these new, it's not vintage, and it was just totally set the tone for the space. Yellow is one of my favorite colors, makes me incredibly happy, so hopefully I'll never get sick of it. I don't think I will at this point. And then if you move over here, these are two of my truly salvaged PBR finds. These were a hot mess. I was able to restore them into two unique game table chairs for this vintage style Atari game table, which was, again, a pure treat for my husband. He loves it. I do not play anything, maybe occasionally Miss Pac-Man terribly, but he and his friends and any guests and kids we have come stay with us, this is like their favorite thing in the whole house. So it's really fun. One of the best features that we kind of created was this flow through doorway. So it goes straight from the main guest room to the outside, so that if you're outside, you can come through that door, you don't have to walk through. So it was kind of like, it's been a really great aspect of the design that we did. My favorite tie back though is the terrified children running off the beach from the movie Jaws, which ties to Steven Spielberg in the main room. The image had the perfect shades of ocean blue and like this vintage feel. When I saw it, I was like, this is both terrifying and hilarious. So it's one of my favorite things. The other thing that I would say about this space is that we kept it really simple with the shower, but the callback to the tile inside of the house, the kitchen, my friend handmade all of that gorgeous green emerald tile, which I hope one day will be in the inside of my pool as well. Fingers crossed. So that's that, and I love it in here. It's a little oasis. What does home mean to me is a really tough question. You know, my husband and I are in our home a lot now because of owning Palm Beach Regency, but we've never been homebodies. You know, I was always the person traveling and having a new experience. We don't have children, so we really took advantage of the last 15 years and have done a ton of that. So for me, I would say home is a place that inspires and reminds you of how good your life is. That's what I'd say. You know, when I look around our home, I see travels, experiences, photos of friends and family, things that are, again, one of a kind and unique to our space. And also, you know, home is about being obviously fully comfortable and relaxed. And overall, our home is definitely that. So I think that's what home means to me. So now for our grand finale, the outdoor loggia bar. I would say that this loggia bar that we had built off the guest house is the heart and soul of our home, because it's truly where we spend so much time with friends and family. So what in Palm Beach, what we call a loggia is a structure that's attached to the building that has open air sides. So this isn't an awning, this is actually a structure that's attached to the guest house. And if you look up, we finished the ceiling with Pecky wood cypress, which is sprinkled throughout the home from our front door to our living room. It is an original characteristic of homes from the 1920s and especially old Florida. So that was a really fun detail that we wanted to bring in, matching the dark color of the wood to what you see throughout the home. My husband and I were sort of convinced that we wanted a hotel lobby type bar, not like a traditional sit-up high bar. So we had a countertop bar hand poured with pebbles and shells from concrete. It has all the peckled top and character that we really hoped it would. And so this is really the mainstay of the bar. And then the front part of the bar, as you can see, we had the Pecky cypress wood done all throughout the side of the bar as well, just to mimic the ceiling and to give it like a real grounded feel. The primary exciting piece, I just save up a lot of birthdays for this one, is the white gold pebble ice machine. I know. I grew up in Texas. I love ice, and pebble ice is like the best ice. So that was my big splurge, let's put it that way. And obviously we've got the sailfish and tons of vintage and meaningful art sprinkled throughout the wall here, from old Slamerin's art to DJ captaining a boat on our honeymoon. He's the captain. And we love rum, we love the Caribbean, so we always keep a good stock of our rum here. So this is when things get really wild. We bring out the wheeled and lighted karaoke machine. Sometimes you'll just find me out here singing badly when I've had a stressful day. It only takes like one glass of wine to get me fired up. Deej is the heart and center. This is my husband of the loggia. And so when guests come over, one of our favorite things to do, he makes rum punch. And so rum punch is super significant because when you travel to old hotels in the Caribbean, they welcome you with a rum punch. And so since we're trying to sort of create a hotel vacation vibe in our house like 24/7, the rum punch is key. And so cheers. Thank you for coming into our home and checking it out, and hopefully you can stop by and next time we'll give you a rum punch.